councilpersons on. That's the only requirement is to be a councilperson. If Councilwoman Martell is also a participant in the plan, the only thing she'll be prohibited from voting on is payment of her pension when she chooses to begin taking. Not for a while.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the General Employees Retirement Committee meeting. It is Tuesday, June 16th, and we are starting. It's 3:10 p.m. Marty, if you can do roll call.
Okay. Trustee Helton.
Here.
Trustee Kramer.
Here.
Trustee Woodruff.
Here.
Trustee Gordon.
Here.
Trustee Pierre. Not here. We still have a quorum.
Very good. Public comments. We have anyone from the audience who'd like to speak regarding any topic? No? You're here? Okay, and I'm gonna, if anyone doesn't mind my making some changes in the agenda to move Greystone Consulting to item 5, and I'll have the actuary and the auditor go up first. So we'll start with Larry Wilson from Gabriel Roeder Smith with our actuarial valuation report.
Yes, good afternoon. Good to see everyone again. We're here to present the October 1st, 2014 actuarial valuation, the highlights, and then wanted to talk about some new legislation and some recent legislation that it's time to comply with. So having said that, if you turn to the booklet that we have, you have the page with our letterhead. The key information is at the center of that page. We get money from the members in the city, and the requirement for fiscal year ending 2016 is $4,010,672. That's 46.6% of drop payroll. Historically, the city had been contributing the percent of pay. Last year, they contributed a dollar amount. Both of them would be, either of them is appropriate for our plan, but the state would recommend not switching back and forth. They try to avoid the possibility of just picking the lower one every year. So anyway, that's the total amount. The members contribute 7% of pay, and that leaves the city with $3,407,705, 39.6% of pay. Last year, that number was $3,528,000, 39.1% of pay. When we say pay, this year non-drop payroll is $8,613,816. Last year it was $9,033,000. So payroll's down. Last year that total contribution was $4,161,000. So the dollar amount was higher. The percent of pay was 46.1. The percent of pay was lower. If you turn, we did have an actuarial gain this year, and we'll take a look at that. But
We exceeded our expectations.
Yes, we did. Yep, and we'll see that the major source of the gain was investment return. We measure that based upon the smooth return, but we had both gains from the smooth return and the market value was exceeded the 7.75% assumption. If you turn to, I guess we just, prior to turning to page 7, or you can turn to page 7, I wanted to point out that comparing this year to last year, there were no changes in assumptions or methods, and there was no change in plan provisions affecting the calculations. So when you compare the columns as a 10-113 to the columns as a 10-114, that is purely the result of plan experience. And if you look at it, the number of active participants decreased by about 8%. I'm on page 7. Covered payroll decreased by about 5%. The normal cost, again, active participants excludes drops. The normal cost decreased as a dollar amount and as a percentage of covered payroll. The normal cost is the cost for benefits expected to accrue this year. So it's the 1 year cost for the current benefits. The unfunded accrued liability decreased as a dollar amount, but increased as a percentage of covered payroll. The city minimum contribution, as we discussed previously, the same thing, decreased as a dollar amount, increased as a percent of covered payroll. And, you know, that phenomenon, again, is caused by the decrease in payroll, the non-drop payroll. One of the measures of how well funded we are is the vested benefit security. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No. Vested benefit security ratio. That's the ratio of the market value of assets to the present value of all vested and retiree benefits based upon the funding assumptions. So this year our ratio is 81.7%. Last year it was 78.6%. So again, going in the right direction there. If you turn to page 12, that's how we developed that actuarial gain or loss. This year, we had an actuarial gain of $314,175. That was the net of two figures. The gain resulting from assets was $1,178,000, and we had a loss from liabilities of $864,000. So the net effect was that gain of $314,175. We're going to look at three factors that affect that gain or loss, experience for those factors. And if you turn to page 34, this is our salary experience. So this year, the average pay increase for a active member, non-drop, who was employed a full year ending 9/30/13 as well as 9/30/14, the average increase in pensionable pay was 4.92%. Based upon our assumptions, we were assuming 3.75%, so that we would say that since pays exceeded our assumption, this was part of the offsetting actuarial loss resulting from pay increases. If you look at more long-term, you can see that the 3-year average pay increases has been 1.94, the 5-year average 2.59, 10-year 4.1. So again, this year might have been some kind of catch-up year, or not sure why that happened. Another source of gain and loss is shown on page 35. It's turnover. These are active members who leave the pension plan not currently eligible for benefits. They could be vested, they could be non-vested, but they're not entitled to current benefits. We make assumptions as to expectations for turnover. This year, the turnover was 70% of the assumed turnover. So fewer people left the group than based on our assumptions. And when that happens, we would say that's an additional offsetting source of actuarial loss. We were expecting more people to leave. Since they didn't leave, we have to fund for their benefits, future benefits, based on future pay, expectations of future pay and future service. However, if you look again more long-term, 3-year average is 100%, 5-year 110%, 10-year 120%. So long-term, it's either been right on or we've had more turnover than the assumptions. And finally, on page 38, the biggest effect on the gain and loss was the investment return. The smooth return this year was 9.47%. That's compared to our 7.75% assumption, and that's that major source of actuarial gain. Longer term, we're still below that assumption, but hoping that, the current trends continue. But if you look at market value, you can see the 1 year and 3 year and 5 year are all double digits. So, again, we'll talk a little bit more about how we got there. If you turn to the page 3 of the letter, I just kind of want to point out that we don't pick the assumptions out of the air. They're based upon plan experience, and the last experience study was for the 5-year period ending 9/30/11. GFOA recommends those be done every 5 years, so we wouldn't be necessarily looking at updating that study until 9/30/16 experience. So that's a ways off. If you turn to page 10, and page 10 is the change in plan assets during the plan year ended 9/30/14. Just point out that contributions came in of $4,188,207. Disbursements were $5,543,325, item C5, so that we dispersed more than came in, not including investment income. So it's could be viewed as a slightly negative cash flow position. And that could have impact on investments.
Has it been that way in the past? I've never really looked at those two.
It has, yeah. That we've had periods when it has been that way. Part of the reason it's off, or that the disbursements are much higher, is we had drop distributions of over 800,000 this year, which was kind of a large one. And if you look at the bottom, the drops, we started 10/1/13 with 2,510,460. And there were 52 members, drop members as of 10/1/13. We ended the year 9/30/14 with 2,914,766, and we're down to 42 members. So, on the next page is that actuarial value of assets. Remember, as part of the pension reform plan redesign, we marked to market. That is that we reduced the smoothing back to the market value of assets. So if you look at the 2014 column, excuse me,
No, I was just mentioning, we mentioned it this morning at the,
the same thing. Are you going to do it? Or?
no, they were
No.
asking why I would even bring it up.
Again, the part of reason we did it here was, there was a big move to reduce the pensions, and it helped us save the city some current dollars to recognize deferred investment gains. If you look at the 2014 column, item E1, we had a market value return of $7,469,081. Had we earned our 7.75%, item E2, we would have earned $5,510,156. So the amount of excess return above our assumption this year was $1,958,925, item E3. The way the smoothing works is we take into account the expected return, the $5,000,005. We take into account 20% of the difference between the expected return and actual return. And, since we had restarted a few years ago, we're building that matrix back up to 5 years. So we have 2 years. The 20% we recognize of the $1,000,009 this year was $391,785, item F1. So taking the 20% from the previous year brings us up to item F6. So the way this works is you take item A, the previous year market value, you adjust it for non-investment cash flow, you add in the expected return, and then you add in the phased amounts. And so that gets us to the 9.47% return this year. And the market value was 10.51. If you look at item H, last year we had deferred investment gains of $2,401,688. This year we have deferred investment gains of $3,368,406. And if you look at the columns 15 through 18, that shows you how we're going to recognize that $3.3 million. The good news is next year, in order to have a smooth return of 7 3/4, we don't have to. We can have a market return below that, and still have a smooth return of 7 3/4 or more. If we turn to page 15, and seeing Steve here, this is accounting, and I'm not going to talk much about it because we have our accounting expert. The GASB 67 numbers, some new terminology, total pension liability, that's old actuarial terminology, or current of actuarial accrued liability. We see how it reconciles from year to year. The 93014 column is actual. The 93015 is projected. The planned fiduciary net position is the new term, or the accounting term, for market value of assets. And we can see how it changed during fiscal year 14 with real numbers, and what we're projecting for 15 with that 7.75% return. Right now, the item D, the planned fiduciary net position, is kind of a funded ratio. It's based upon market value of assets, and the number is 76.36%. The old funding method, which came out of GASB 25 and 27, which are no longer current, that funded ratio would have been 72.4%. So again, we're making progress on the funded ratio. Interesting, I had mentioned the percent of pays that some of the contributions related to. For accounting purposes, we believe that the best approach is it includes drop payroll. So you can see that, we have an $8 million and change payroll at the beginning. Non-drop, including drop, we're expecting $11,482,162. So we got close to $3 million in drop payroll. If you turn to page 18, again, accounting, just talking about it for purposes of contrasting it with some state legislation. Roman numeral V, Roman numeral VI 6, the discount rate. What the accounting requirements are is you need to project out all the future benefit payments, and then project out the cash flow of the market value of assets. And you need to determine whether there's a crossover point. Is there any point in the future where the fund would not have enough money to pay the benefits for that year? You wouldn't see it much in Florida local law plans, because we're all required to contribute on an actuarial basis, the local law plans like ours. You can see it in some other states where there would be a crossover point. Illinois, New Jersey come to mind. For 3 years, the Florida retirement system did not contribute the actuarial amount. We did work earlier this year, 2015, with the Florida Auditor General, and they were satisfied that they would not have a crossover either, the Florida retirement system. But our system, again, based on the accounting, which includes future contributions. We're projecting no crossover. If we had a crossover during the period where we were negative, we would have to use a bond, tax-free bond rate of return during those years. So, you're probably talking, I think, Florida Retirement System has a non-funded plan. I think their rate was about 4.5% that they use. So we would, and that obviously would bump up the liability. The lower the discount rate, the higher the liability. Anyway, the whole point of this is that the state legislation says, do this calculation and tell us when you're going to run out of money, but don't take into account any future contributions. So that's the difference between the accounting and the state rules. So it's kind of, I mentioned that in the state of Florida you wouldn't expect a crossover point because of mandatory funding. So essentially the city and members would have to break the law, to not contribute. So it's kind of we don't think it's a very valuable display, but we're going to have to do that. And if you look at Roman numeral 7, it shows the accounting standards say, do a plus and minus 1% on the net pension liability, and that's intended to show sensitivity to our assumed rate of return. The Florida statute says do it minus 2%, so you can see, just by looking at it, how much we're going to show being unfunded at minus 2%. I believe the board has already discussed and decided they want to show a plus 2%. Again, to show both sides, not that we expect to earn close to 10%, 9.75, but just to show both sides of the issue, like the accountants require us to do. If we turn to page 23, I just, again, with some recent legislation, point out what mortality we're assuming. So we're using this RP 2000 combined mortality table, which means it includes annuitants and non-annuitants. Usually, based upon the mortality table, the non-annuitants mortality rates are higher than the annuitants, and then they have a combined basis, which we've been using, which seems to fit our plan because, we have retirees that are annuitants, and we have actives, that aren't. And we're using projection scale AA. For disabled participants, we're using the RP 2000 disabled table, and we're projecting that forward with scale AA. The governor on Friday signed legislation that says effective January 1, 2016, we need to determine funding based upon the mortality from the Florida retirement system. And so we're not sure how that's going to be phased in with the date of 1/1/2016. The Florida retirement system, effective July 1/14, updated their mortality table or assumptions. And for non-special risk, which is our group, for the healthy group, the non-disabled, for the females, it's the RP 2000 annuitant with scale BB. So again, I mentioned non-annuitant, a little higher mortality. So we would expect, that for females, we're going to be showing longer life expectancies, and the net effect on our plan is, since we pay monthly benefits, people are going to live longer. It's going to cost more. We're going to have to, fund at a higher level. For the males, it's the same RP 2000 generational table, 50% annuitant white collar, 50% annuitant blue collar. The blue collar mortality also is higher mortality, shorter life expectancies. So that'll help us. The scale BB is more higher mortality improvement than the scale AA. So again, that increases liabilities. For disabilities, again, female disabled is RP 2000, disabled female table is set forward 2 years. Again, that's much higher mortality than we're assuming. They don't have any projection there, and they have a set forward. So that would offset it to some extent, or would reduce the liabilities based upon our assumptions. For males, it's the 100% male rates for disabled, RP 2000 disabled. But
So at what point in the future we're gonna have to use those new mortality tables for, like, which valuation report
Yeah,
would
you
they
know,
be incorporated into?
if I had to guess, again, we expect direction from the state as to how that's, because, again, we don't do calculations as of January 1,
Right.
2016, but it would seem the most, my expectation would be our 10/1/16 valuation, be the first valuation following it, and that would determine the city contribution requirements for fiscal 9/30/18. We have a few years for that to happen. Some have suggested from, not necessarily actuaries, but some of the professionals, that maybe it makes sense to kind of phase into it so that you don't have a big jump.
Oh.
I'm not sure that makes sense, but we still have to use reasonable assumptions. We couldn't use half of one and half of the other. We could potentially adopt BB, the projection scale they're using. And again, there's no guarantee that FRS won't change their assumption. Historically, the Florida retirement system does an experience study every 5 years and changes assumptions, and they have been changing mortality. There is a new mortality table issued by the Society of Actuaries. It's called the RP 2014 table. So it's updated from this table, and it has a projection scale, MP 2014, which has a lot of differences in that it shows mortality improvement, the MP scale, based upon your year of birth, your cohort. So people born in different years are experiencing different mortality improvements, and that's what the new table recognizes. The new table is completely based on insured and corporate pension data, so it has no public plan data in it. They didn't ask for public plan data. 2 large states submitted their data, and the society rejected that data. And one of their comments was that, at least for one of the plans, the experience under that state system was was dissimilar to what the insured data and the corporate data showed. So, it may not be that the RP 2014 is the best table for a government plan. In addition, the Society of Actuaries is
We
undertaking.
don't have a choice, do we? I mean, didn't you just say that the state legislature was gonna, like, mandate
Right.
the table we gotta use?
Yes, we have to use FRS, but I'm
Okay.
saying some of the issues with the FRS table and whether it could change
Oh.
before that is that there's a new mortality table out, and whether they're going to adopt it and then I was going to say the society's has taken upon itself to develop a governmental mortality table. We don't expect that till 2018.
Okay.
So, anyway, that's just,
So, but in regards to that, and this is a question I have for Bob, because our plan document states which mortality table that we use. So, would we want to amend the plan to state whatever the new one is, or would we just be better to say, well, we're going to use whatever mortality table that
The law
the state
requires.
says the law requires?
Yes,
Makes it easier.
yes.
what the state is mandating is for funding. The mortality table in our ordinances for calculating different optional forms of payment.
Oh, you can have it used for two different things.
Right. And
Want
it's
to talk about the consequences of doing that, whether or not you recommend it?
Well, we're currently in that situation. Part of the problem with using the funding assumptions is they have projections built into it. And so when somebody retires, you kind of, there's one school would say, stop the projections at that point. And we have a number of clients that do it that way, that, that you project the table to the fiscal year of retirement. So if you were to retire now, it could be 14, 15, but you wouldn't project it beyond the date you retire. That's kind of a common way of building into it, and why it may not make sense to use the same mortality table. But, as I say, mortality for funding changes usually more frequently than the
And that's
actual
not the one that's specified in our plan document. The one
Not
that's
the
in the plan
funding.
document has to do with the calculation of pension benefits.
Right.
Okay, I got it.
And you may recall, I'm sure Lori recalls, and probably the other members, that we recommended updating that table, and
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
we may want to consider that again, but it didn't happen.
No, it didn't. Okay.
Okay, I'm just about done. Page 44 is the final page of the report. This shows the unfunded liabilities that each amortization base, the amortization payment, the amount remaining unfunded, amortization payment, and the remaining funding period. So that's, again, to do the contribution determination, we pay the normal cost, we pay this amortization payment, and then we adjust it for interest. All of the payment, amortization payment, and normal costs are calculated at the beginning of the year. The money comes in during the year, the contributions. So this is our certification that the valuation is in compliance with state statute. For all of the benefits provided under the ordinance, we have developed liabilities, and we're certifying to that under this report.
Very good.
And that sets the contribution for what fiscal year?
Yes, this is for 15, 16. It's right around the corner.
So if you are satisfied with his report, motion would be in order to accept and adopt the valuation dated October 1st, 2014?
It's October 1st, 2014.
As of October 1st, 2014, and ask the pension office to file it with the city and with the state.
So move.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimous.
Madam Chair, I had one more item. I talked about the act that the governor signed. I don't have any more to say on that. There is this, I don't know, people are giving it different names, 60T. It's Chapter 2013-100, Florida statutes. It was old Senate Bill 534. We had sent a letter, and Marty reminded me that the board hasn't approved it. The statute requires that the plan report it you know, what I mentioned, the runoff dates, assuming no contributions, the accounting liabilities based upon a prescribed mortality. That's currently not the Florida Retirement System mortality, nor is it the mortality table we're using. So it's a third table. It seems like the legislature likes to, thinks they have a better handle on what mortality is than some of the actuaries. And then contributions. So that has to be reported to the state electronically, and they've given us the format. We've reported our firm for some other clients, and it's passed the screens. Now we haven't gotten any other feedback, but it's been accepted. And then the state is, based on that data, the state's going to maintain a database, and we mentioned how a lot of the requirements under that reporting put the plan in a more negative light than maybe we would think it is. In addition to that, there would be a human type of report that would need to be put on any website of the plan and certain websites of the city if there are multiple. And that would be part of what we had proposed to do both the filing of the electronic file and the human report to be put on the website. Trying to think.
Is that something we discussed at the last meeting, that we
Yeah, we have.
approved for you to do
Yeah.
that? I don't know.
I don't
Did
think
you give
Marty
us a
had enough.
price? Or,
I thought it was approved already, but,
Oh, I thought you said you wanted me to.
no, I thought it was approved, but you felt,
proceed. So it's something that you need to.
weren't
proceed
sure.
to
You didn't have
prepare.
it in the minutes, or?
well, this minutes is from the previous. We want, I think it happened in December. You weren't here in February. There was no actuary here in
Oh,
February.
Kelly.
It was before that,
Oh,
December meeting, right?
Okay, so it's already approved.
You could,
Okay.
okay. So you just need to prepare that stuff and
Right,
then.
yeah, and the due date is 60 days from today,
Oh, okay.
you know, when you approve this report.
Very good. So you'll get with Marty with the stuff that we need to put on the website.
Yep, we'll prepare that.
Is there anything additional that, like, could we put more information on the website than what the state is requiring?
Yes, definitely,
That
yeah.
you might suggest including?
Well, we talked about that you know, since we had to show the 5 3/4, 7 3/4 minus 2, that we would show plus 2% also. You know, which would be 9.75 to show both sides of the coin. So we're recommending that. Some of the plans are adding some kind, you know, we have limited commentary in the report that gets posted. Some of the plans are preparing like a information from the board or a generic comments that if either are going to be posted at the same time or are available if questions arise. You know, if a retiree looks at the report and says, hey, you know, you're showing the plan's going to be running out of money in 12 years. You know, I'm concerned about my pension. You know, you have something that you could show them. The other thought is that the press may pick it up. That, again, the same thing that, you know, you got this liability, you know, we're showing it's X, and now if you look at the minus 2%, it's 3 times as much, and, you know, it would be something you could provide. You'd have information. I don't know if Bob has
No, what?
thoughts on.
Sorry, what?
I'm sorry. We were talking about whether there would be any commentary from the board, either posted on the website or to be available should questions arise, either from retirees, members, or from the press. I don't know if
Regarding
you've
maybe
talked.
to some of the increased numbers that this requirement shows that might scare people about.
Oh,
these higher liabilities that,
Well, certainly, it's gonna be a lot more confusing and will raise a
Sure.
lot of questions.
yeah,
So if you can cut short those questions by showing what the numbers really mean. You know,
Yeah.
as well as putting, how much is the total pension cost based on total payroll, not just drop payroll? How much is the normal cost compared to the annual required contribution? So that they can compare what the cost of this pension plan is for the workers who are actually here, rather than what we have to pay off for the prior liabilities. Remember, if you close the pension today, so nobody gets any more pension, you still gotta pay off that past liability. So the question is, what does the pension plan really cost the city to run the city? Well, it costs the contributions that are due on behalf of the non-drop payroll, but that would seem high if you compare it to the full payroll. For example, if, just pulling numbers out of the air, if a third of your workers are in the drop, and you're only comparing the required contribution to the non-drop payroll, which is what the state requires, then you're not really showing the true pension cost to the city, because there is no pension cost for the people who are in the drop, because there's no additional cost. Now, so that could significantly overstate the actual price that the city's paying for maintaining pensions for the people who are still working. Also, the annual required contribution is comprised of normal cost, how much of somebody's pension grows each year while they're working, plus past service costs, which deals with people, many of whom are already retired, plus administrative expenses. So these, I think the more that, and now we've got two different bases of funding with all these disclosures. I think that if you can get Larry to present in, common, easy to understand language, what this really costs, you'll get a more informed presentation.
very good.
You may want to authorize him to do that.
Well, see if you could put together,
Some good ideas.
or, yeah.
Yep.
Any questions for, the actuary? No? Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's move on to the auditor's report. Mr. Stephen Gordon?
Very good. In the first place, I think you have the, in your package somewhere, the audited report. The auditor's opinion was exactly what you wanted. Unmodified, meaning there were no complications. It was what everybody calls a clean opinion. I like to get that into the minutes, so you have it there. As far as the numbers are concerned, I usually start right on page 7, going over those with you. You can see up at the top, on the two columns there, you can see the receivables are a little bit lower than last year. No significance to that. It just depends on what day of the week September 14th happens to fall on. Excuse me, September 30th of 2014 happens to fall on. Your investments were $77.2 million as opposed to $70.3 million the year before, so an increase of just under $7 million. And cash is down again. That's just no significance to it. It just depends on what day of the week September 30th happened to fall on, and what your managers were doing at the time. They may have sold something and not reinvested it at that point. That's all. And the liabilities were about the same. So you had net at the end of 2014 as compared to 2013. Just under $78 million as opposed to just under $72 million. So about an increase of about $6 million for the year. And you were holding at that point, the way I look at this, is you had $77,890,000 of assets, of which $2,914,000 was being held for drop benefits, and $74,976,000 was being held for the defined benefits. On the next page, contributions from The city, we're slightly higher, and that's just a function of what Larry computes and tells the city to pay. It's all goes up and down based on the investment results and the demographic changes, et cetera, all the parts of the process that he goes through. The employee contributions were down mainly because the payroll was down, and that was a percentage of payroll at that time. This plan is actually unusual, at least in my practice, in terms of the investment return. I have been finding that the 2014 return was pretty good, but not nearly as good as 2013. Yours, on the other hand, was almost exactly the same. That's, like I said, only my practice, which is maybe in the neighborhood of about 30 plans, municipal plans, plus other kinds of plans, and I don't see that very often. So, very interesting to note. The prior year, you did have some other income from securities litigation that you didn't have this year. So you took in $11,657,000 this year. Last year it was $12 million, a little over $12 million. Benefits paid were higher, which is generally a good thing. I mean, that's what you're here for. So it was higher mainly because you did have more members receiving benefits, more retirees, and you had a COLA in there. So those two things combined. The refunds, which includes drop distributions there also, were lower. Varies from year to year, but there were more withdrawals from the drop this past year than there were, in the year before, in 2013, than there were this year, that's all. Admin expenses were down a little bit. There is a schedule for that you can see on page 20. You can see the ups and downs there a little bit. Biggest drop, I guess, was the actuarial fees. You had more studies done in the prior year than you did this past year. The miscellaneous, actually, part of that was misposted. Part of it should have been in employee benefits. That's why the employee benefits is a little bit lower than the prior year. Part of it was put into miscellaneous by error, but it was too small for us to make the adjustment. It was below materiality. Legal fees were a little higher. You had a lot of work on ordinance changes that you gave to the attorney. And salaries are up because you had the new person during the year. I don't have any notes on the travel expenses, but that's just a function of who you decide to send to conferences.
No, just looking like a big jump. I know I didn't go.
Well, it's about $3,300, and it is a normal expense.
How much are you drinking?
I didn't look into the difference because overall, $3,000 to this plan is a very small amount, and besides that, it is a normal expense to have, whether it's a little bit up or a little bit down, to have the conference and travel expenses is normal for your type of plan. So back on page 8, the overall picture was that you took in the $11,657,000 and you spent the $5,005,000. So you increased your assets that you had available to pay the benefits by about $6 million, a little over $6.1 million. And that's how you went from the $71,776,000 up to the $77,890,000. Always, of course, whether that's good or bad depends on what Larry says, because what we're showing here is what you actually had, and what Larry figures out is what's going to be due in the future. And so you compare the two to see how you're doing. And as he pointed out, the funded ratio did go up, so this was a good year. It's always good when you're moving ahead of the funded the liability that's due. There are, because of GASB 67, there are a couple of things that I would point out to you that haven't been in here in the past. The footnotes are always very boring and only accountants like them, but on page 17, something is new, and this goes, I really point this out only because Larry was talking about it. As far as GASB 67 is concerned, we're showing the liability, the net liability, with a 1% minus or plus. I know you talked about 2%, but this here is what we have to put in for GASB 67, and this shows what the results of that net liability. So right now, based on your current discount rate of the 7.75, the net liability is 24 million, a little bit over. If it were a percent higher, the liability would only be 14.5. So you can see that 1% difference makes a large amount of difference in the net liability. So if you show a 2% plus, it's going to really reduce the liability, and a 2% minus is really going to show a big increase, which is exactly what Larry was talking about earlier. Here you can see at least what 1% looks like. Another thing that's new with GASB 67 is on page 22. Again, this is information that was always available. Charlie could provide it for you, but this is just the money-weighted rate of return. But now it has to be published in your financial statement. So we didn't compute this, but we added it on. We got it from your investment advisors, and from your monitor. And this is, you can see the money-weighted rate of return each year, year by year, going back there. So that's new. Again, it was not information that wasn't available to you. It's just that it wasn't published like this before. And I believe Larry has already gone over this because it's in his report, but on the next page, on page 23, is the schedule of changes in your net pension liability. So this is kind of a combination chart between his office and mine. He prepared this, but he took part of the information from my report. You can see the top third of the page there shows Larry's computation of the pension liability, and he came up with $102,007,000. And then he takes the assets that we show at the beginning of this booklet, $77,890,000, and we subtract the two to come up with $24,117,000, and that's where that net liability is concerned. And right now, this shows 76%, but again, I would caution you, this is not the same computation as it used to be. So it's showing even higher, I think, than the old computation would have been, correct? Correct. Which, as I point out to most of my boards, that's certainly not going to hurt, because even though there are lots of measures of the soundness of a pension plan, everybody seems to focus in on this unfunded liability. And so if a higher rate shows up in the newspaper, that's not a bad thing. We don't have to point out the fact that it's computed differently. In any case, these are the principal new things that were involved in GASB 67 that we had to change. Other than that, there were no issues that I need to go over with you. I know Bob usually asks me this, but we had no problems with any of the professionals. They were all completely cooperative. Their office were very helpful, and we had particular help from Charlie on the Salem Trust issue, because we had to do extra work, as you know, because of the adverse opinion on their internal controls, and the way we solved that in what I felt was the least costly way to do it, I had to find some way to get a report on the balances and the gains and losses, etc., independent of Salem. And my solution eventually was, after asking around where to do that, my solution was through Charlie to send out confirmations to the individual market segment managers that you have and say, here's what Salem Trust told us was the balances. Do you agree? And it turns out they're the only ones that I can find that maintain records independent of Salem Trust. So there was actually this additional internal control that we never used before. What we did in terms of our audit procedures is we always got this report by the auditor of Salem Trust, who looked and said, yeah, we've looked at their internal controls and you can rely on their report. And we never went further than that. And so that limited the amount of procedures we had to do.
Steve, how did that turn out?
It turned out that they all matched just fine. You know, and I think I mentioned when I was here that the issue was not anyone saying that there was money missing or big mistakes. It was simply that the auditor said, we don't know if these are any good or not, because we looked at their work papers internally and we can't find any evidence of whether they did the work properly or not. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, we don't know. And so in order for me to be satisfied that the balances I'm showing you here are accurate, I had to find another way to verify them. And it took longer than having that report from Salem Trust, and that's why I sent that invoice for about $500 for the additional work. But it did show us all, actually showed me, I didn't realize before that the managers were keeping independent lists. So they've always done that, and it was there, and that's an additional internal control. What happens in the process is if Salem Trust were to make a mistake, they would end up having to reconcile it with those managers right away, because they're on top of things for their own segment. So
Something that you would recommend doing in the future?
no, really,
Just to,
it's an extra procedure, so I had to charge extra for it. It was a lot easier when the internal control report came from Salem Trust, said, yeah, you can trust these. And so that was less costly, and that factors into my fees, how much time I'm going to spend. So no, but it was good to know that even had they made a mistake, I mean, we found everything matched, but had they made a mistake, someone would have been on their backs other than us right away. So it was interesting to find out. In any case, there were, I always get cooperation from your administrators and from Bob's office and Larry's office. We had no problems with anything. It was, other than the Salem Trust issue, which did resolve itself, there was no problems.
okay.
And what was the condition of our books and records?
Excellent. Excellent, yep.
Very good. And I'm just going to ask you a question based on the advice of our attorney.
Uh-oh.
Is whether or not regarding this Salem Trust audit report, were there any negative impacts to the plan as a result of this adverse opinion? And what are your recommendations as to how the board should best proceed in regards to Salem Trust?
Other than the small amount of, in terms of negative impact, that first part of the question, other than the small fee, I mean, it is $500, and so that was an additional fee it cost you. Other than that, there was no negative impact that I know of. There's maybe intangible in terms of an uncertainty. You're uncertain at that point unless things get corrected at Salem Trust, and I'm sure Mark is going to talk about that, but unless they got corrected, you would be uncertain. Is this information we're getting correct? And it's $78 million. It's a lot of money. You want to be sure that the numbers there are right so that you make the right decisions about things. What to do in the future? Well, I would say this. I will not tell you whether to keep the service from them or not, but I will tell you that whatever you decide to do, you should document your decision. Don't simply say, well, let's move on. It's with inertia. You should give careful consideration, and you should decide. If you decide to keep them, fine, terrific. Just have good reasons that you've discussed and have them in the minutes. Because I wouldn't want next year to come around, and because you anticipate everything's getting corrected. Certainly everything that they did was correctable. There was no fraud. There was nothing missing, anything like that. And you expect it all to be corrected. But in the worst case scenario, if it doesn't, you wouldn't want a member to come and say, wow, you knew about that and didn't even think about it. So what I would like to see you do is simply give it the proper consideration and have good rational reasons for either staying or going. That's all. I wouldn't want it nowhere in there that you didn't even consider it, That's all.
Very good. Thank you. So I believe we need to have a motion made to approve these financial statements.
Yes.
Second.
And to authorize the pension office to file it with the state and the city. The city needs it as part of their CAFR. Is it already part of the CAFR?
Yes.
Okay, then the city obviously has it, so we just need to file it with the state.
Very good. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And let me give you my annual advice when you get this, that this is the most important piece of paper that comes across your desk during the year because it shows where all the money went, the money that came in, the money that went, and none of it went in your personal pocket or for something improper. So please take it home, put it in an important place, and tell the people who you know, who live with you, where it is, because claims can be made against you even after you leave the board and even after you leave this earth, and they can be made for up to 5 years thereafter. If a process server showed up at your house suing your estate, at least if somebody knows where this is, they would match the name on the lawsuit with the name on the pension on this. They would call Steve, he'd direct them to me, into the pension office, and so on. Not to be morbid about it, but that's why this is so valuable. So please.
So what do I tell my husband this?
Pardon? If I die and
tell him
somebody
good luck.
sues me, give him this piece of paper.
Might be your golden ticket.
Okay?
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
You did, I think, or he,
And I seconded it.
Fine.
Okay, moving on. We're gonna Greystone Consulting with our investment report for the quarter ending March 31st.
First, it's nice to report a gain. Always good to have.
Gains are
positive
good.
numbers, negative numbers. The quarter wasn't real easy. In that quarter, there was a lot of news that came out that was worrisome, and there seems like there always is. If we go back in the past, what I talked about is the economy first, then the market, and how we did. Was same format, first the economy. If we were to go back to quarter before the first quarter, so fourth quarter last year, GDP was up 2.2%. Slow growth. If we get into the first quarter, the first number that came out was 0.2%, so barely up at all. Then after the quarter, when they revised the first estimate, they revised it to be a negative 0.7. The reason that we actually, the first quarter was negative GDP was because if you remember, the dollar was very strong during the quarter. So larger companies that sell internationally, their goods are more expensive. So therefore less is bought. So our export-import number in the United States was worse than what they originally anticipated. So because the dollar was strong, whenever they got the numbers back on export-import, they revised the GDP to a negative number. The belief was that there was still pent-up demand. That, in other words, it wasn't going to be a permanent problem, that it was just short term. Great, thank you. So, yeah, I'm sure you don't want me to do that. So, apologize. So what that led to was when you look at the quarter number last year, if you remember, when I say last year, I mean 2014, the first quarter, same quarter as this year. The problem was weather. Same thing this quarter. In this quarter, the weather, it was very cold, and then actually you read reports about in Boston, snowbanks of 6 and 12 feet, and so people don't go out, so they don't spend as much. You also had energy prices decline from the middle of last year through the first quarter, and so with energy prices down, what you saw was that the area that services the energy field, like exploration, production, rig counts, all that was declining. And so that created a lot of unemployment during a quarter that had been driving employment prior to that. So that's what caused the quarter to be low. But that pent-up demand is believed that it will then show up in the second, third, and fourth quarter with better numbers. Still looking for slow growth, so still not exciting. So what the manufacturing service sector during the quarter was above 50, so that's 50 months in a row of it being above 50, which means it's still expanding in the United States. The unemployment number went from 5.5 to 5.4, and the job numbers that have come out since the quarter ended have been a little better than expected, and have seen a slight bit of wage increases. So they're starting to say that maybe inflation will start to show up. But during the quarter, it wasn't. During the quarter, inflation was 1.6. The Fed mandate is 2, so it's still below the Fed mandate. So it hasn't been a concern. But what you did see is corporate profits. So companies that report earnings, they were only a little bit better than what was anticipated, and they were anticipated after they had lowered the estimates. So they lowered the estimates first, and then they only were a little bit better. So that was a little disappointing. Again, for the same reasons, because the export-import, because the dollar, those things that I mentioned earlier. So now we go into the second quarter. The numbers that have come out so far, retail sales numbers have been better, housing have been better, and so they're hoping that it will continue. So that was the economy. So we go to the market. Each of you have one of these, I hope. Got an extra summary packet if you'd like one. extra ones, or I would give Mark one, sorry. So if you look at what happened during the quarter, if you look to the first page, you can see what happened in the market. The S&P was up 0.96. I'm looking at these pages, the first page is what the market did, which is in that summary packet, right in front of you,
Right,
Barry.
right.
That's it. So the very first page, the S&P was up 0.96. The very top, and the Dow Jones was up 0.33, so they both were barely up. And I am following the summary packet that I just passed out that gives a summary of it. So if you look at the third one down, the Russell 1000 the Russell 1000 index, which is larger companies, is up 1.59. I mean, if you drop down the Russell 2000, which are smaller companies, up 4.32. And if you drop much further down to where it says Russell Midcap, up 3.95. What you saw, smaller companies did better than mid-sized companies, did better than larger companies. Why is that? Because the larger companies have more international sales. So they were impacted by the dollar more. The small, mid-sized companies have more domestic sales, more sales within United States. So they're not impacted by the dollar as much. So that's what you're seeing there at the top. If you go down to the bottom and look at what areas did the best, you're probably not surprised to see the second best producer, or one of the top producers, consumer discretionary. But what that is that's people spending. Well, the idea is, the belief is if you got to pay less at the gas pump, that money you saved, you might spend. And so even though they didn't spend it in that quarter, the belief is they're spending it in the future quarters, and therefore retail sales, things like that, retail companies benefited. And that's the reason consumer discretionary is up at the top. When you go to the bottom, though, energy, they're directly impacted by a decline in oil price and natural gas prices. So you can see energy was at near the bottom, now down 2.9, and utilities down 5.2. So you go to the next page, so that's the U.S. market, barely up. You go to the next page, which is the international market, the developed countries, right at the top, up 4.88. If you go across where it says local currency, so if you bought those international companies in their own market and didn't have to bring them back to the United States, you were actually up 10.97. But because our dollar was so strong during the quarter, when you converted it back to the U.S. dollar, you were only up 4.88, half. But you're still up more than U.S. stocks did. And when you go to the bottom, emerging markets up 2.28, same thing. If you look at the local currency, they were more than double their return, up 4.94. But because the dollars had the same impact on emerging. If you go to the next page, it's the bond market. You go to the third one down, this is Barclays Capital Credit. That is corporate bonds. And corporate bonds were up 2.16. They were the strongest. And you go two below that to government bonds, up 1.6, and pretty far down where it goes to mortgage backs, up 1.06. So your credit or corporate bonds were the best, followed by government bonds, followed by mortgage backs during the quarter. The reason you see all positive numbers, if you remember during the quarter, interest rates actually came down. Before the quarter, interest rates were over 2% on the 10-year Treasury. At the end of the quarter, they're at 1.9. Yesterday, the 10-year Treasury was at 2.32 at the end of the day. That is a big move up from 1.9. That will hurt bond values. So that will cause bonds to decrease. That was the reason that you guys were considering moving. So it didn't happen in this quarter. It's happened after the quarter ended, that interest rates have started to move up. And of course, everybody is waiting on what the Federal Reserve is going to do. And today they're meeting and tomorrow they're meeting to discuss when they're going to move the Fed funds rate higher, the discount rate higher, and if. Yeah, most are anticipating that it might be September. Nobody really believes right now it's going to be June. I haven't heard an
Seems to
announcement.
keep on getting put off. Every quarter, it's like 2 quarters away. And then as you get closer, it's then 2 quarters away again.
And to Larry's point, what they said was that they are not going to make a decision on moving them up or leaving them the same until they see the economic news. So while the economic news continues to wafer back and forth, and recently, this quarter has actually turned out to be negative, that's what caused them to put it off. So in the quarter we're in now, if the GDP number comes out soft again, I mean, soft means like 2.5%, somewhere in that range, not 3 or 4 or 5, then you'll probably see them put it off again. But they want to raise rates because while they're at this level, they have nothing they can do if something goes wrong going forward. They're already at the bottom. So they want to create some flexibility for them by having rates, short-term rates moved up. They've already said they're not going to move them up dramatically, They're gonna move them up gradually, and they're gonna move them up at small increments. So that's what the Fed wants to do it. It's just they've been putting it off, as Larry said. So that's what happened with bonds. So if you go to the next page, how did our managers do? I'm sorry, first, how did we do overall? So on page 4, if you go to the very top, we were close to 80 million, 79,576,000. So that was trying to hit these little hurdles. It's nice to see. But the gain was 1,284,000. So a nice dollar gain, good quarter. You'll find out in a minute it's a little bit below the benchmark, but not too bad. And when you go on the left-hand side, look at our weightings. We're slightly overweighted in large cap value and slightly overweighted in large cap growth, slightly underweighted in small cap value, slightly overweighted in small cap growth. And our two internationals were slightly underweighted. So overall, we're 60.83 versus 60%. So we're a little overweighted in stocks, but within our range, so we do not need to rebalance. Then right below that is our bonds. We're 22.6, slightly overweighted, but again within our range, 22.5. And then our hedge fund to fund, 9.42 versus 10, and our private real estate, 6.5 versus 7.5. Slightly underweight, again, all within ranges. So in all cases, we do not need to rebalance. How do our managers do? Next page. So I was actually pretty excited to see this because last time, one of our discussions that we spent a little more time on was Buckhead. And the reason was their shorter-term performance had been below, but we had talked about their longer-term performance had been better, and that they took less risk. In this quarter, I actually would have thought this would have been a difficult quarter because they buy larger companies, and larger companies within that Russell 1000 value did not perform as well.
They did well.
I'm sorry?
They did well, though.
But they did well. Exactly. That's the reason it's nice to see that they actually outperformed. And actually, the other plan that we went over this morning, their large cap value was down 4.73 because they had overweighted energy. But here, am I doing that? But here, it was nice to see that your plan that Buckhead actually had outperformance, as Larry just said. Now, your 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year is still below, but like many active managers, the 1, 3, and 5 have been difficult because that's been a low quality off the bottom. But when you include the whole time period, you're actually up 6.3 versus 6.13. So including the underperformance in the 1, 3, and 5, they've outperformed over the whole time, which includes the down market too. So you've had higher return, less risk, and they've added value. Positive alpha, positive sharp. So Wedgwood, you haven't had them very long. I listened to David Rolfe give a presentation in St. Pete. Basically told them that as long as the market continues to go up strong, we are going to underperform. We are concerned that the market is getting stretched in value. And so we're going to stay more defensive. If the market pulls back, we'll become more aggressive. But until that happens, we're going to have more cash than we normally have, and we're going to stay defensive.
How is your feeling on that, as far as Greystone and yourself?
We think the economy is going to continue to grow slowly, that inflation is going to stay relatively low, although we're looking for some indications of inflation recently because of the wages. But we think the market will do okay in that environment.
You don't see a large correction around the corner?
We see a correction could happen any time, but we don't see a large correction. We don't see a bear market. We don't see a 20% pullback. We see a 10% because you have those. I mean, that's normal. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had but one in the last 3 years.
You don't see a change in direction to bear?
We don't. We don't. Now, actually, this morning, I listened to the call in between the meetings briefly, and that what they said was they're still looking at the economy chugging along, no difference than what is actually being reported since the quarter ended. And they believe actually Europe is getting penalized because of Greece right now. Right. And they believe that's being over-penalized, and they think that Europe is a value on the pullback. So they're not real negative. But there's all kinds of things out there could go wrong. I mean, Greece, of course, certainly is one of them, but also, Russia and Ukraine or ISIS. I mean, there's a lot of things. But as long as there's not something that happens that is really dramatic that no one anticipates, they believe oil prices will be higher at the end of the year. They believe the economy will continue to improve, and they don't think inflation is going to run away. So that will be okay for financial assets. I hope we're right. And Wedgwood is more defensive than that. And what they're looking at is PEs. So they're looking at the price you pay for a dollar of earnings. And the price you pay for a dollar of earnings now, depending on what you believe earnings are going to be going forward, is around 18. That's not cheap. That's not expensive, but it's not cheap. It's on the higher end now. And so that's what's causing the market to be as volatile it is on news, because it's not cheap anymore.
So they've really got to increase their earnings to justify their price.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To justify the future price, you've got to see increasing earnings. So Sawgrass is the one you hired that was more defensive, more conservative by nature anyway. And Sawgrass you hired to complement Wedgwood. Wedgwood's more concentrated. Wedgwood, by the way, overweight energy, and that's when you're seeing that difference too, 0.78 versus 3.84. And also, you hired them actually October 1st, not October 31st. I went ahead and looked at what your returns were from the first day. With Wedgwood, you're up 5.89 instead of up 2.58 since you hired them. And with Sawgrass, you're up 7.77.
Is that all the difference between 1 month?
1 month. Yeah.
Takes us, wow, that's quite a significant,
It is.
that was a good month.
It was, and that's the reason I wanted to tell you. I mean, actually, since you hired them, they both were up quite a bit more. And you're absolutely right. And I was surprised. 1 month can make that much a difference, but it did in both. So Sawgrass, you can see the returns are a little bit below, but again, a short period of time. And they overweighted industrials and financials, and that's what caused their return to be a little bit below. And they are typically more defensive. And both of those managers buy the larger companies within their grouping.
Charlie, you've talked about consumer discretionary, talked about energy.
Mhm.
What you haven't talked about, I'm just curious as where these managers are, related to healthcare.
Yeah, so healthcare was the best performer.
It's been that best performer for a relatively long time, but a dangerous best performer because it could be a bubble.
Yeah, and now you're talking more biotech. And the
Well, biotech's more dangerous
Yes.
than the just general healthcare.
That's right.
But I haven't even heard anything about healthcare.
Yeah. So actually, if you go to the top one, the healthcare, they had about equally weighted it relative to the benchmark, so it didn't have an impact. Buckhead. If you go to Wedgwood, they had underweighted healthcare, which also, so they had overweighted energy and underweighted healthcare, so both hurt. But the bigger one was energy. Their overweight energy had the bigger impact.
Where people are making money today in the market is healthcare. I don't know if that's going to last, but it's where people have been making money, making decent returns over the last 24 months at least, probably much longer than that.
So 24 months would take
At
you back
least
to the
24
first
months.
quarter.
When you say healthcare, do you mean pharmaceuticals?
Well,
or you mean
that's right. We're distinguishing between
Okay.
between those two because pharmaceuticals are a crapshoot. That's the dangerous. That's sometimes they're companies without earnings, commanding high prices, almost going back to the tech bubble in the 2000s. But there's also general healthcare, your HCA, your Tenet, so forth, your Johnson and Johnson, which are not heavy, into experimental things like that.
Oh yeah, no. So healthcare is broad, as you know, medical
well,
supply.
if you
versus-
read today's Wall Street Journal, in the front page, the article was about Aetna, United Healthcare buying each other out. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the insurance area.
Yes,
And I don't know whether you mean that or whether you mean
Well, I wasn't really
Merck
meaning
and
that.
Pfizer and Sanofi and all of these other.
I'm talking just by the pharmaceuticals. I'm
Okay.
not talking about just I'm really talking the more conservative end of the healthcare. But I don't see that they're doing much of that. The HCA, the Tenet, the hospital, and some of the larger pharmaceuticals that are not out there, like with one promising drug that might get approved, but might get shot down in stage 3. Something that's got an established pipeline, well-paying returns on their drugs out there that have fairly long period of time before their patent runs out. Are our advisors into those things or not?
All of them are. It's just they're in different weightings relative to their benchmark of what their benchmark weighting is. So actually, if you go through your managers, Buckhead is slightly underweighted healthcare. Wedgwood is slightly underweighted. Sawgrass is slightly underweighted. GW is a little overweighted, but didn't have great stock selection within the area. MDT is slightly underweighted, but both your internationals, Thornburg and Renaissance, are slightly overweighted. And those are the two that actually had better performance too.
Yeah.
And healthcare is what helped them. And they also underweighted energy, so both of them helped them.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we go to GW next, actually, their return, their overweighted energy, overweight materials and industrial, and that's what you're seeing here. But when I say underweight or overweight, they all have it. I mean, they all have some weighting
I understand
in
that.
those industries.
Are they putting emphasis or not?
That's it. That's what the overweight or underweight. That's the same concept as emphasis. So with GW, you can see for the quarter, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and since inception, it's a little bit below. But we're talking that since you hired them, 20.87% a year. 20.87% a year. So, and really, you guys decided to go into that area at the bottom of the market, which has really helped. And then the same way with the one right below it, when you look at MTT, 24.5% a year. It's over the whole time period. You know, so with GW, it's a little bit below the benchmark.
That was the bottom of the, just after the bottom of the market for the entire market.
The entire market was at the bottom March 9th of 09. So, but you guys went into it near the bottom, which is very fortunate.
Yeah.
And most didn't, because most people were scared to death. So very few people actually went into the small mid-cap space in that area, and that's when you guys did. And both of those managers have positive alpha, so both those managers have added value when you adjust for risk, GW and MDT. So now we go to the two internationals. Well, both of them have outperformed almost every time period relative to their benchmark, Harding and Thornburg. But let's start with Thornburg, because last time we had a lot of discussion about Thornburg, because you remember Charlie Wilson actually came and visited Marty when they were in Florida. And he was the portfolio manager that took over when Wendy decided to retire in March, and he had been there since January 2014. They just made an announcement a couple weeks ago that Charlie is no longer going to be running that fund after they just had another good quarter, and two other people that had a lot of experience at Thornburg are going to be running that fund.
There's a lot of turnover.
So there's a lot of turnover. So our firm is frustrated that there is that kind of turnover. We're going to be writing a new research report. If the research report is negative, they're still approved manager today. When the new report comes out, I'm going to bring it to you. If it goes negative, I will bring a search to the next meeting if it's already negative, so that way we're being proactive.
It would be negative based on the histories of the new managers.
It'd be negative based on the managers that don't have experience running the fund. So the
But
historical performance
they were running something before that.
at Thornburg. And actually, Charlie's staying at Thornburg. He's just no longer going to be involved with this fund. So here, they had him there since January 2014, saying that he was going to be the heir apparent whenever Wendy retired. Wendy retires, and then they go 2 months and they replace him on the fund. So that's not what you normally see.
Well,
So-
you want to know what really happened there.
That would probably be good to hear if we could have ears on the wall. Probably be interesting. But we don't know that, so that is something that does concern us. And so when the report comes out, if it's non-approved, of course, I'll bring you a search to the next meeting. If it's approved, I'll bring the report anyway so you can read it and see what our firm's opinion is. So with Thornburg, you look at the quarter, it's above, so a very good quarter. The 1 year, and by the way, like we just said, they overweight healthcare and consumer discretionary. And the 3 year is the one that's a little below, but when you look at the 5 year, and since you hired them, you know, it's been above with a little bit more volatility, and they've positive alpha, positive sharp. When you go to the next page to Harding Loevner, their returns have been better for every time period. And that 1 year return up 5.32 versus negative 1.03. Yeah, that's outstanding. Yeah, and very good. They overweighted healthcare and tech. They underweighted utilities, so that helped them. Higher return since the beginning, less risk. They've added value. They also slightly overweighted Europe.
One
Now-
other little comment on the healthcare. What I'm gathering, one of the things that could hurt healthcare was on the biomed side, if that explodes. But also, if the Supreme Court throws out the subsidies on the Obamacare, that would also have a very negative impact on the healthcare stocks.
It could, depending on what area. I mean, it probably won't, affect your Johnson & Johnson. So it depends on the area.
But I'd say overall,
Hospitals, it
the
certainly could
broad
have.
index
negative.
of healthcare.
It's hard to say for sure.
I think if they throw it out, you're going to need to really be careful.
Okay. The next is the bonds. They continue to be phenomenal. It doesn't really make sense that they could outperform as much as they have since the beginning. 6.48% versus 4.18, over 2% in bonds a year. That's outstanding. So Garcia Hamilton has really rewarded us. They have a longer duration. That could hurt us, though, in the quarter we're in now. So it helped you in the quarter that I'm reporting on, ending March. Is since March, having longer bonds would go down more if rates move up.
his are longer, he's not really long-term, is he?
Not,
He's
there's
longer than,
the index.
yeah.
Yeah, longer than the index. No, they're not 20, 30-year bonds. Yeah, as a
Like
whole.
6 years and stuff like that?
Yeah, they got duration. So duration. So the time
Okay.
period you measure what the impact on interest rates is around 5 to 6 years.
Mhm.
So that's on the longer end, which means 1% movement up in interest rates
8%.
affect your price
Yeah.
by 5 to 6%.
It was
That's what
8%.
duration.
I thought it was 8%.
No, so 1% is the duration measures
Yeah.
the percentage. So if it's a 5-year duration, it affects
Okay,
it
I
by
see.
5. It's 6 year, it's 6. But they also underweighted corporates, which didn't help, but because the duration overruled that. The duration had more impact. So they've had positive alpha, positive sharp. They've added value since the beginning. Now your two hedge funds that are next, both of them have underperformed. The reason they underperform is they're hedging. So you bought hedge funds with the idea that if interest rates started to rise, you would be short. So in other words, you would sell something you don't own. You'd be short that instrument. So if rates started to rise, which hurts bonds, because you're short those, that would help part of your portfolio. So if rates continue to go down like they did in this quarter, you don't get that benefit, and instead those shorts hurt you. And that's what happened with your two hedge funds. So they're there to act different than your bonds. And that's what they both did. And Larry asked me about the other plan had interest. They have more equity orientation. So they went with a little more aggressive hedge fund that has more stocks in their holdings than what both yours do. Yours have their emphasis on credit.
They were
or bonds.
outperforming our two hedge funds by a significant amount. And so I asked the question of Charlie, why was that? And
That's a great question. And that's why. It's because they have more equity orientation and yours has more fixed. So yours is to protect more on bonds and theirs is to protect on bonds and stocks, but it won't have that direct impact if rates start to rise. If rates start to rise, theirs won't protect as well. And then your real estate, you move money out of bonds into real estate. You can see it continues to do well. The quarters, up 2.99, the 1 year up 12, and then since you hired them 11% a year. If you were to go back up and look at bonds over 1 year, bonds were up. The Barclays Intermediate Government Credit was up 3.58%. If you see that up there, the bond index was up 3.58. Well, you were up over that same 1 year 12. So almost 3 times what the bond index by moving it into real estate. So again, I give you credit for making that decision. And yet you're up less than the benchmarks because you're less debt, you're less leverage. Your leverage is only 13.5%, but the industry average is over 22.
yeah,
So
that was one of the things when we looked at this advisor was that they did use very little leverage.
That's exactly right. Very conservative, very low leverage. And you actually have a positive alpha, so they've actually have added value when you adjust for risk. You put them all together for the quarter, you're up 1.74%. The index was up 2.17, so you're up a little less. Same way with the 1 year, same way with the 3 year, same way with the 5 year. But the 5 year is much closer, 9.78 versus 9.91. But now, including the down, you're actually up more, up 7.12 versus 6.73. So over the whole time period, you've had higher return, less risk, and they've added value, positive alpha and positive sharp, which we're going to see in 2 more pages. But first, the next page is your compliance checklist. The no's, I talked about Wedgwood and why it's a no. Again, you've only had them for a short period of time. They're being very defensive. Same way with Sawgrass. If you go to GW, their return difference was like 30 basis points a year. You still made over 20% a year, but it's no versus the index, a little bit less. When you go down to real estate, I talked about it, that it had less debt, less risk. So that's reading the no's. And then when you go over private advisors and Pine Grove on the other side, the 2 no's is because you just started with them because they're actively hedging the credit market bonds. And so that's the reason they have the no's. So you go to the next page, this is you. You are the orangish yellow circle. So when you look at this page, which is page 9, what it shows in the orange yellow circle is that you have higher return and less risk over the whole time period. And if you could, that's where if you could draw it and say, where do I want to be? You want to be in the northwest quadrant. Higher return, less risk. And so when you look down below, look at the numbers, your managers have provided 40 basis points extra return, extra basis points return a year, so less than 0.5%. extra return a year. Your risk, though, has also been less. Your standard deviation is 9.9 versus 10.23. Your beta is 0.95 versus 1. When the market fell, you fell less. When the market went up, you captured 101% of the up moves. When the market went down, you captured 98% of the down moves. And that's what's led to a positive alpha and a positive Sharpe. So higher risk-adjusted returns.
That's because we diversified it so much.
It's because you've diversified so much, and also the reason you have higher returns is because you went into the managers that are a little more aggressive at the bottom of the market. It's also because you moved money out of bonds and you went into real estate. So a bunch of moves that you made is what's helped your returns.
Good.
And the hedge funds haven't shown that benefit yet because you've just been in them a short period of time, and they will help you if rates move higher. And we haven't had it happen until this quarter we're in now, but we haven't reported on it yet. So the last page, there are a bunch of changes on this page, on page 10, from when I was here last time. Last time when I was here on page 10, this is our view of the market looking forward. It said overweight U.S. market, and now it says equal weight because the market's gone up a lot. And so whenever they redid this, the market was hitting new highs 2 weeks ago, and they went to an equal weight at the very top for the U.S. stocks. International, it said underweight or equal weight, and now it says overweight. So they believe that the monetary policy that's being done by Mario Draghi over in Europe and by Abenomics in Japan will ultimately work because they're flooding their economies with cash. And they believe that all the way, just like it did for us 4 years ago, and Bernanke did it, they're thinking the same thing will happen here. So that's the reason they went to overweight. And then emerging markets were overweight because that market is cheaper. The PE, remember I've said price earnings around 12 and said it's on the higher end? The PE in emerging markets is around 12, where in the United States around 18. So it's a lot cheaper. So that's the reason they went to overweight. In the bonds, we're not overweight bonds, but within bonds, we like investment grade still, so we're overweight there. We're underweight international bonds. We're overweight tips. That was underweight before. That's the belief that inflation's going to start to show up. So tips are inflation-adjusted securities. And then we're still overweight high yield, and emerging markets we're underweight. When you go into alternatives, we don't own REITs. We own private real estate. We are underweight. Commodities, we were underweight. We went to overweight. That's because, again, the same thing, the belief that inflation could start to show up. So that's reading commodities. Master limited partnerships were equal weight, and hedge strategies were equal weight.
What was the thinking on the emerging market bonds being underweight again?
So their view is that there's going to continue to be a lot of volatility in the bond market, and overall bonds are going to be bad, and emerging markets are even more volatile. That emerging markets as a whole, just being emerging markets, is more volatile, more uncertainty. So if you have a liquidity issue in bonds, the less quality or the less stability there is, the more they can be impacted. And these new rules that have gone into effect, Dodd-Frank, they have taken the primary dealers that were in bonds and removed them from the bond market, so there's less liquidity. So if anything bad happens, anyone who's not higher quality or stronger, or a large number of those trading out there, they can be impacted in their price quicker, and emerging markets can be impacted. So overall, to summarize, the quarter we made money, made less than the benchmark in the quarter. Longer term, we've made more than the benchmark over the whole time period and with less risk. And
What do you see for this coming fiscal year? We keep on seeing, well, I know our year is different than the calendar year. But like, when we had some pullbacks, we were like, the market was like basically where it started the year.
Larry and I just talked about that. So like 2 weeks ago, the market was at all-time high. It
Yeah.
actually was the same place it was in December.
Right.
So because in December it was
so-
an all-time high.
So if you're there and you're now 6 months into the year, and you're basically where you were when you started the year, what is the projection for the calendar year, or if you want the fiscal year, for our fund?
Yes, either one is a guess, but through March, the fiscal year, we're up 4.23 net through March. Since March, market went up higher and then back down.
Right.
So right now we're lower. Well, right now we're up 100. So right now we're about where we were in December, as far as the market level and the equity. On the bonds, they actually have given back some, because when rates go higher, bond prices go lower. So overall, we're probably up since March, less than what we were at the end of March. We're probably, instead of up 4.23, we're probably up something like 3. So annualize that, so take that out for 12 months, we're below 8%.
Yeah, we're below the
Our expectation, though, over the next 7 years, so longer, is the returns to be lower than what they have in the past. But 20 years, then we go back to what we think normal returns are, which is in that 7 to 8,
yeah.
but not for the next 7. Because the market's all-time highs and bond market rates are low, so you put those two together, you wouldn't expect as higher returns going forward the next few years.
Okay.
Thank you, Lori. I would like to ask one more item. I'm not good at this, but I try to remember it. The last time with North Miami Beach General, as far as asking for a fee increase, I had said I would not ask for a fee increase for 3 years, and our fees are currently at $27,500. So the last increase was October 1st, 2011. So it's now going on the 4th. We're in the 4th year. And the last time when we were here and we asked for a fee, you were at 7 managers, and now you're at 11 managers, and your assets were 55.8 million, and now they're at 79.5 million. So we've had, that's what, well, no, I don't take credit for the assets going up, but it's a big difference as far as work too. So what we're hoping for and what we asked for this morning was a $5,000 increase, of which we would lock that in also for the next 3 years, just like I did before.
So would you take you to 32,000
$32,500
per board?
per board.
Wait, I heard 5,000.
That's correct.
From 27.5 to 32.
$5,000 increase
Oh, yeah.
from his
Right.
current fee.
No, and then he said 32. Oh.
Yeah,
Because
32.
he gets 27.5 now.
How about meet you halfway? I make a motion to that we increase, what's?
Greystone Consulting.
Consulting, $5,000 and lock it in for the next 3 years.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Is that difficult?
Sorry?
Is that difficult?
I always worry about it, but thank you.
Well, the
Appreciate
direction
working
you've
with
given us has been
Yeah.
correct.
Thank you.
You've given us good direction over the last number of years, so.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you, Charlie. Moving on, Jane Goldstein with the Rockwell Class Action Update. You've been waiting patiently, been here all day.
I enjoy seeing everybody. See everybody at FPPTA, I hope. As you're aware, in August, I came to the board and we were going to bring a case against Rockwood Holdings for the merger with Albemarle, and we did file a complaint on behalf of police and fire. We did not need to bring general employees into the litigation. Litigation was filed in Delaware. Another plaintiff also filed in Delaware. Likewise, there were 2 cases filed alleging the same action in New Jersey. We went in there, we got documents, we looked at the merger agreements, we demanded more disclosures prior to the registration statement and the merger happening. We were successful in that. We hired our own experts to evaluate the merger and whether it was a good merger and the prices were right. We feel that the numbers were correct. However, we did demand all these extra disclosures that were made to the shareholders prior to the proxy vote. And we have settled the litigation, and the judge preliminarily approved the litigation, and the final approval hearing is in July 30th. So, and further disclosures were made, and the merger did go forward. Basically, a real different type of litigation. The merger and acquisition litigation happens, as I explained, very quickly, and you don't know until you get in there, but we did do depositions and confirmatory discovery and get all their financials and get significant disclosures for the class. And with that, any questions? It's been a long day, so I know everybody sort of pooped. Thank you. Thank you.
Pension attorneys report. Mr. Sugarman.
Yes, let me first ask you to consider the McGraw-Hill case. We have a recommendation for a lawsuit coming from Spector, Roseman, Kudrow, and Willis, SRKW, one of the firms you hired to be your counsel. A recommendation is coming from them, not from us, because we don't recommend one way or the other on that, because we've hired specialized lawyers for that. So we'll ask Mark Bogan to, again, address the board, and he will explain to you what's happened so far. Remember last time we told you of the significant and well-publicized success that they had for us, and which got the records and what they discovered from the records and what they recommend that you do now.
Do we want to have him call in?
Yeah. Meanwhile, while he's doing that, we'll get, while they're doing that, I'll report on some other things, because we're going to get the named partner who's handling that. Right. I'll talk to you about some other things.
Oh, is that him?
Oh,
He's fast.
wow. Okay.
It's called texting.
So, Rob, this is Bob Sugarman. You are live and on the air here at a public meeting. Four of our 5 trustees are present, and Mark Bogan is just about to start explaining the McGraw-Hill case in your firm's recommendation.
Okay.
Everything that is being said in this room is being recorded, video and audio, and as well as minutes being taken, because in Florida everything's done in a public meeting before litigation is filed.
Okay, very good. You ready?
Ready.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Bogan. I'm with the law firm of Spector, Roseman, Kodroff, and Willis. Make it simple, SRKW. And what I'd like to do today is briefly outline what has transpired in the past, over the past 3.5 years, and what our recommendation is today and why. When there is a fraud, as you know, or a wrong committed by a company, you could either authorize a lawsuit, or in some jurisdictions, you can request what is called a books and records request. Okay? And a books and records request is a legal procedure in which we can go and find out from a company, get their documents. It's kind of a way to do an investigation, due diligence, before jumping into a lawsuit. So in 2011, your board retained us to do a books and records request against a company by the name of McGraw-Hill. And as you may recall, after the collapse of the economy in 2008 and 9, Standard & Poor's, which is owned by McGraw-Hill, was caught overrating residential-backed mortgage securities so they can sell them to funds like yours. In other words, it's tantamount to having junk bonds being rated AAA. In our efforts to conduct a books and records request, McGraw-Hill initially fought us at the lower court level and succeeded. We then appealed, and the appellate court agreed with us in a precedent-setting case. It was the first time, and that's what Mr. Sugarman was talking about, and it was written up in the papers, the first time an appellate court in New York allowed a books and records request when investigating a wrongdoing of a public company. So after going through this legal proceeding, we were then provided with approximately 15,000 documents to go and do that investigation and due diligence. After the 3.5 years of the courts and the investigation, we were recommending that an action be filed. But before I do that, let me briefly talk about 2 quick points. One, a congressional investigation, as you may have read in the newspapers, was conducted into the whole credit rating industry, and based on the wrong committed by Standard & Poor's, McGraw-Hill, the federal government and 20 state attorney generals went after McGraw-Hill, and McGraw-Hill was required to pay $1.6 billion. And that means that the company that you invested in was forced to pay $1.6 billion because of a wrongdoing. So all shareholders were damaged. So what are we recommending? We are recommending a shareholder derivative lawsuit. This means that we would bring an action against the directors of McGraw-Hill and the officers of Standard & Poor's on behalf of the company. We are not recommending suing the company. Let me say that again. We're not suing the company. We are going after the board of directors and the officers of the company who are responsible for overseeing this wrongful conduct, who are responsible for stopping the wrongful conduct. Another way to look at it is we are not trying to take money from the company. We are trying to bring money to the company. So what would this derivative lawsuit do we believe two or three things. One, by bringing money to the company, it will make your investment more valuable by enhancing shareholder value. Bringing money to the company will help all shareholders. Second, we will also try to seek corporate reforms and corporate governance. Our firm has been very involved in doing this in many cases. For example, in the Jacksonville Police and Fire hired us to do a derivative action against Abbott, and we were very successful in bringing corporate governance and corporate reforms to their wrongdoing. In trying to do it in a quick summary, if you allow us to move forward, there's no cost to your fund. If we are successful, the court will award us what it determines a fee. If we're not successful, we don't get paid. We will be working closely with Mr. Sugarman's firm, and as I say, there's no cost to your fund. And
So the fee arrangement is contingent, meaning that their firm only gets paid if they win, and the money comes from the defendants or their insurance companies. There's work that we will do on your behalf together with them as local counsel in reviewing the documents and settlements and things of that sort. We would be paid out of that same fee, not by you and not by the company, but out of the same fee, which is reviewed and awarded by the court. However, the decision as to whether you participate in this lawsuit is yours. And I'm not recommending one way or the other because it's outside my expertise. That's why we hired expert lawyers to make a recommendation to you. And you would be required to maintain a certain number of shares during the pendency of this litigation. So Charlie would have to instruct whatever investment manager bought this to maintain the shares. Rob or Mark, what is the number of shares, the minimum number of shares you recommend?
Rob, you want to comment on that?
I would have at least 100 shares. And the reason why you have to have shares in a company as you bring this litigation is one of the requirements to have standing to bring a shareholder derivative litigation, and that's when you stand in the shoes of the company to enforce a right. You have to still have a contemporaneous ownership from the time of the wrongdoing which you have through the entire litigation. So 100 shares would be sufficient if you deem to want to sell your stock in McGraw-Hill Financial.
I also spoke to Rob last week, Rob Roseman, about what would be required of you. Sometimes you have to produce records. Sometimes you have to sit for deposition. But I was told that that is very rare. If that does happen, I will be with you, and an SRKW lawyer will be with you. All expenses will be paid for SRKW, and SRKW may be able to seek an incentive fee that the court would give us over and above any attorney's fees or other settlement consideration to compensate the fund for the extra effort that we put forth.
Excuse me, when you say
Rob?
When you say incentive fee, not us, you're talking about the fund. The
Yeah,
fund
not-
would get
not the lawyers,
The fund
the
would get
fund
the incentive fee,
We're going
not
to
us.
our fund treasury itself. Rob, did I state that correctly?
Right. It's a discretionary award that a court gives in these type of cases because the court is recognizing, but for a plaintiff to come forward to bring these actions, they would not bring it. So the court says, because you have brought the case, you have helped you lawyers in prosecuting the case, the court wants to say, thank you for bringing it, but for you, no one would have brought it, and I will give you a incentive award, which is completely discretionary. And those situations usually arrive when you actually sit for a deposition, produce documents. But as Bob just mentioned, in these type of actions, it is very rare, and we've been doing derivative litigation for the better of 20 years, it's very rare that the defendants will want to take the deposition of a client here because there's really nothing that a client could say. It wasn't like a regular shareholder litigation. Why did you buy the stock? The question is, what are you trying to do? Enforce a right of the company, and they don't need to take a deposition for that. At a minimum, you would have to show that you are owners of the company, and we already have those documents. Of course, in order for us to do books and records, one of the requirements under New York law is to show evidence that a client is a holder of the company in question, and we already produce those to defendants, which allows us to go ahead with the books and records.
So, Rob and Mark, what is your firm's recommendation as to what your client should do?
Well, we're recommending, obviously, to move forward. We've been doing this for 3.5 years already. fighting in court in New York and going through all the documents, and we'd ask that you allow us to proceed, as that there's no downside to your fund.
Mark, is there any advantage to our funds per se?
I'm sorry, is there any
advantage of our fund per se to go ahead with this?
Rob, you want to respond on that?
The fund in a class action is when you bring a fraud case against a company for issuing false and misleading statements which cause the price of stock to increase. When a company announces the wrongdoing, the stock falls. That's when a plaintiff class action is brought to recover monies. Here, that case did not exist. Technically speaking, McGraw-Hill did not commit securities fraud. What happened was you had a subsidiary who violated the law by issuing credit rating reports on securities which they knew to be not justifiable. So in a derivative action, what we're trying to do is make the company whole, as Mark said before, to try to recover monies, but more importantly, to implement strong corporate reforms to prevent any future wrongdoing. That is how you enhance shareholder value, because once the market realizes and sees that McGraw-Hill, after this action is over, and has strong measures in place which will prevent wrongdoing from occurring, to make sure that the board is fully aware of what's happening at Standard & Poor's and puts in place mechanisms to make sure they're in compliance with the law, the market's going to say, this is a good corporate company. This company is going to be operating in compliance with law. They're not going to get hit again with over $1 billion in damages. I want to invest in this company. And what we've known over the years and see when we have real settlements with very strong corporate measures and the market perceives this company is now functioning as a good corporate citizen, people want to, again, invest in the company. That's when you see the price of stock go up. That's how shareholder value is enhanced. And as a long-term investor such as you, that's important. And that's when you see the value in these cases. It's not getting a check at the end of the case. It's just seeing how the price of stock goes up because the market now recognizes this is a good investment. And that's where your value is increased.
Rob, I think Trustee Gordon may also be asking, is there anything that we get that's different from what all the other shareholders get? Do we get anything above and beyond that in return for our efforts, assuming that we don't have to sit for deposition or produce documents, because you already explained that?
Right. Again, this is not a class action where shareholders are being compensated. You're actually bringing an action on behalf of the company. You're standing in the shoes of the company and bringing an action against the directors of McGraw-Hill, against certain officers of Standard & Poor's for their breaches of fiduciary duties, which caused the harm to the company. So at the end of the day, when there's a settlement, or if we go to trial and we win, everything reverts back to the company. Any monies that we recover goes back to the company. The therapeutics involves the company. There is no recovery on behalf of shareholders. So the benefit for the fund is the satisfaction of knowing that it is correcting a wrong at especially a major corporation, like what we did in Abbott on behalf of Jacksonville, and that if there was any contribution of time on behalf of the fund, then we would seek that incentive award. But again, there's no claim form at the end of this case. It's not a typical class action that you might be used to. It's more of how do we fix this company through corporate reforms and monetary return, which again will increase the value of the stock price, which affects your portfolio's bottom line.
So the three things in summary is increase shareholder value. That's the only thing we can do as attorneys. To an incentive award, if we apply for it, we can't guarantee it, but we apply for it. And third is many funds that we deal with are wanting and interested in corporate governance and stopping companies from doing the wrongdoing. So we'd ask that you allow us to proceed on this.
Can I just ask Charlie just to confirm that we do still have holdings in McGraw-Hill with one of our managers, or we don't really?
I don't. What I wrote down was confirm when I get back that we have 100 shares and make sure that the manager leaves 100 shares if we do.
So we need to make sure that that exists.
Is that just so that we participate to help
So
you
you have,
all?
so you have standing.
Exactly. Larry's exactly right.
Did we have?
Right. Again, the requirement is in order to do.
We got it. We got it, Rob. Got it. We got it.
Okay.
We have a motion to allow
It's a mouthful. It's a
so
mouthful.
move- I so move upon confirmation that we do have at least 100 shares.
So
That could be a problem if
we don't,
it sold our McGraw Hill.
Well,
right,
that's
then
what
we
my-
can't
my
run with
motion
it.
said.
So the motion would be based upon the recommendation of SRKW and contingent upon us having at least 100 shares. The trustees authorize SRKW to file a derivative suit against the officers of Standard & Poor's and McGraw-Hill and authorize the chairman to sign the necessary documents and the engagement letter with the lawyers on a contingent fee basis as explained, with all costs, expenses, and fees to be paid by SRKW should they lose, and should they win, to be paid in accordance with the order of the court. Is that correct?
You don't want to add if all the costs be paid by your firm.
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. 'Cause I didn't make the recommendation. Okay, is that all right?
Yes, that's perfect.
I accept that.
That's where we're at.
And we have a second? Second, all in favor? Aye.
Okay, just one more question, Rob
Thank
and
you.
Mark, both of you. About, I know each lawsuit has its own lifespan, but about how long will this take? Our next meeting is in August, and by that time, and I know you'll be reporting to us all significant events and for our quarterly meetings, but by how long will it take? And by August, what can we expect to have happen? August
Okay,
23rd.
Right now, what we're
We have
doing
to check
is drafting the complaint, of which, when we have a draft to show the board, we will present that with a draft retention letter for the board to review and to sign off, and then there will be a verification, which is a one-page document that says that the person is authorized to allow the filing of this complaint and has read it, and then we will then be able to file. And what typically happens in these cases, the defense will move to dismiss on futility of demand, which is basically saying that in these type of actions, you normally have to make a demand on the board. Send a letter to the board saying, you did bad things, and we want you to take action against yourself.
We'll have the complaint filed in August. Hopefully, it'll be ready in August, right, Rob?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
Okay. And oh yeah, one more thing you have to add to the motion, please, to instruct the manager who bought that to retain at least 100 shares. Anything over 100, they can do it as they choose.
Well, I think that's in the motion.
Well, it was contingent upon holding at least 100. Then you got to tell them to keep at least 100. Yeah.
I'll
Okay.
accept that amendment.
who should we check with? Is there somebody we can check with?
Charlie.
Check with you, Charlie?
I tried to call, and so the person's there that could have checked it. He's not there right now.
Okay.
It can be done quickly.
Thank you very much. If you get to Broward County,
Very
give me a
much.
call. I'm very impressed. None of you, normally when on my other hat, when I'm on the dais, everyone's playing with their cell phones and everyone's playing with their computers. And you guys are really good. You guys aren't playing with it.
We are.
No, well, you hide it really well.
Well, we pay attention.
You hide it really good.
I'm at level 3 now.
You love
We were playing Words
Thank
with
you.
Friends.
Thank you very much.
Rob, thank you, Rob.
Bye,
Thank you
Rob.
very much.
Thanks, Rob.
Have a great day, guys.
Rob, where are you in Broward?
I'm on the Broward County Commission. Yeah. So you'll see when they're, everyone's playing with their cell phones, or I got my laptop up and stuff, and you guys are just so great. You're just sitting there listening.
Maybe we can teach you something.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to come down and teach us something.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bob?
Mark.
You well.
Yeah, copy pager on everything because I'm going to be out for a while.
Good man.
All right.
Okay.
Back to the
Continuing with the lawyer's report, let's start with the good news.
Yeah.
The good news is that we finally received our favorable IRS determination letter. This is good. The reason it's good is because now we know we're qualified with the Internal Revenue Code, and that gives us the following benefits. We don't have to pay corporate income taxes on our income. So we get income from investments, we get income from the city, and we get income from the workers. The workers don't have to pay income taxes now on the part of their compensation that is the city's pension contributions on their behalf. They will wait until they retire to have to pay taxes on that. The workers can pay their contributions with before tax dollars. That puts about 1.5% more in their take-home paycheck, and increases the taxes that they pay a tiny little bit when they finally retire. And if if an individual worker goes bankrupt, we now know that their pension is protected and cannot be reached by the bankruptcy trustee or by their creditors. These are all the advantages of being tax qualified. In order to be tax qualified, we're going to have an amendatory ordinance that we'll be preparing for you. It is boilerplate sort of stuff. We'll get you an actuarial impact statement, or you should authorize Marty to order it from the actuary. I predict it will show no expense whatsoever. This is all regular stuff. Will not require collective bargaining. Votes of our members are no longer required. So, and that will have to be fairly quickly amended after we send it to you. This letter is good through the end of January 2019. So we will, assuming there are no substantial amendments to the plan between now and then, we won't be talking to you about filing for another one until the middle of 2018. So we've got about a 3-year break before we have to do this again. And a copy of the determination letter, which Marty has, should be provided to the city, to the city's auditor, to our auditor, and in our records. So that's all good news. More good news, the IRS has finished its examination of its drop issues. They were trying to figure out whether the money contributed to a drop plan is a defined contribution plan inside of a defined benefit plan, which would have subjected it to lower annual limits and might have meant that some of our people could not get all of their drop credits, or whether it is what we've always said it was, another way of paying a defined benefit. So they have sided on the defined benefit plan. It's no longer a concern. The only plans that have concerns are folks that permit additional contributions to the drops over and above, and we don't do that. So for the moment, until the IRS changes their mind again, we are in good shape. We reviewed and revised the minutes from your last meeting. We obtained a good answer from Salem that they will be paying for the extra CPA work. There is a concern about the amount of insurance they have. We believe it's $5 million. Between the two North Miami Beach plans, there's almost $200 million in custody with Salem. That $5 million does not cover just your plan, does not cover both North Miami Beach plans, does not cover just Salem's clients, but covers all of the companies underneath their holding company. So if you take a look at the extent of the assets that they hold and what $5 million is a percentage of that, it's much, much smaller and thinner than the kind of coverage that you have, for your $70 million. How much insurance do we have here, Ronaldo, Marty? A couple million? Fiduciary liability? We have $5 million. That's ours, our own fiduciary liability. We have $5 million towards 70, right? How much money does this pension plan have? And how much fiduciary liability insurance do we have in our policy? $5 million. So we've got 5 covering 70. They've got 5 covering billions. You'll have to decide whether or not you feel that's adequate. Next. You heard what the legislature did from Larry. That's basically the new mortality tables. We gave an opinion on Carlos Diaz. Carlos Diaz switched to part-time employment on the 8th of June. He had bought 4 years, and he had a couple of questions. His first...
Can I correct that?
Yep.
Okay. I checked with the HR. He is still full-time as of now. Yes. Right? I just checked with Norma earlier, and he's still full-time. I mean, he may be going... It's in process?
From PD to HR.
Okay.
I think the date, I could have it wrong, is approximately June 12th.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, he's going to go from full-time to part-time. He asked 2 things. He said, I bought 4 years of permissive service. I haven't finished paying for them. I pay for them through employee deduction. Question, can I still pay for them by having it deducted from my part-time pay? Our answer, Larry's answer and our answer, yes, you can. If the city's willing to make the deduction, we'll take the money. Second question from Carlos. I was happy with what my pension was back in October 2013, which I believe was the pension, around pension reform. I'm not really happy with the pension that I got after that, so can I just have my money back and we'll freeze the pension as of October 1st, 2013? The answer to that's no. So that's the answer on Carlos Diaz.
Is he vested? He's vested.
Right. No, he's switching to part-time. Now, the switch to part-time raises another question that came up for a very complicated issue that seemingly is going to be resolved between now and the 5 hours I spent on this last week, dealing with Marcia Alexander. But it was a very intriguing intellectual exercise, nevertheless. And what we learned was that some of our members are retiring and going back to work for the city. Now, that is not prohibited by our plan. It is not expressly permitted by our plan. It's just not prohibited. So that, I don't have no problem with our plan. I have no problem with state law. Our problem was with the Internal Revenue Code. Because the Internal Revenue Code says we're going to give you all of these tax advantages for retirement plans. Retirement plans are meant to give people income after they retire, not while they keep working, even in a part-time capacity, with certain exceptions. So the continued employment of certain workers, such as those under age 62, for example, or those who have reached normal retirement age without an express provision in the plan permitting their continued work and receipt of a pension benefit, may threaten our qualification. Because the IRS doesn't know about this, because they don't ask about it. This would come up either by an IRS investigation or a complaint to the IRS. But there are a lot of exceptions to this, and it's very fact-specific as to how these things occur. So I'm going to recommend to you that you authorize Marty to contact the city, and he will give them a list of our pensioners. I want to go back 3 years. They will give back to him, hopefully, a list of those pensioners who are or have been working for the city in the last 3 years, and then a bunch of questions I'm going to ask. What was their job before? What's their job now? When did they retire? When did they come back to work? How many hours did they work then? How many hours do they work now? How old are they? Things of that sort. And because it's very fact specific, and the exceptions are kind of all over the place. So I could tell you the whole thing about it, but you wouldn't remember it because it's kind of boring. But I sent Marty and Lori a paper on it that I used to learn this from. I couldn't write it any better than one of my colleagues in Indianapolis wrote it. So you can take a look at it if you want the details. Otherwise, I'll do the work and give you the answers once I get the data on the employees. Where we're probably heading on this is we're going to need an amendment to the plan permitting our retirees to work under whatever conditions the city is willing to reemploy them and the union doesn't object to. Because we don't want to fall into collective bargaining over this, because that in North Miami Beach takes a long time. So
That would also not jeopardize our tax.
right, that would, well, if this has been going on for a while, we might have to self-report to the Internal Revenue Service and do a voluntary compliance filing, which would require payment of a fee by the city. We can't pay it, of about $8,500 and some legal fees. That's the way we solve this in 2 other cities, and that's probably the best way to solve it, because if we just wait to get caught by the IRS and they catch us, it'll cost 5 times that amount, maybe more. So, but I'll let you know. I don't even know if there are violations because I don't know the details. That's only the qualification issue. Then there's a taxation issue. Oh, okay.
Would you like to
Great.
comment?
Hi, good afternoon, Rose Amberson. We do have an internal policy on rehire of retired employees that dates back to 1998 that does allow it. So I think it behoove us to conduct an audit and self-report if necessary. We do have currently, we have an internal policy, administrative policy, that allows the rehire of retired employees on, there's specific caveats. It's on a temporary basis. It's, well, on a temporary or part-time basis without benefits, and it spells out the criteria. It's either limited to less than 20 hours per week during a 12-month period or 40 hours a week for 5 months. And it requires the city to continue to try to recruit for a regular non-retired employee and so forth, but it is allowed. So therefore, it has taken place. There are a handful of folks in-house right now. So, we haven't gone back for 3 years yet. I think it'd be wise to do an audit, and if we need to self-report, then let's do so, and let's update the internal policy to administrative policy, and of course, the board would do what it needs to do to the plan. But I think it's a good idea. I'd support that.
Thank you. And then, so we'll work together on this and get it. That'll take care of the city's, our issue with, which we don't have an issue because the city can hire who they want. But that will take care of our issue of whether we can continue to pay pensions to people who continue to work, and the answer will be generally yes. The second question is, if folks continue to work, how much of a tax are they going to pay on the pensions that they receive from us? That's a taxation issue. Under Section 72T of the Internal Revenue Code, unless there was a bona fide separation of employment lasting about a year, and the reemployment was not prearranged, and probably a lot of these were prearranged, then if the worker separated before age, it's either 55 or 59 and a half, until they reach that age, they have to pay an additional 10% tax on their pension. Not to us, to the federal government. So if they're in the 20% bracket, they're now going to be in the 30% bracket, just for their pension. And what does that matter to us? We have to correctly code the 1099-Rs, showing a premature distribution. Of course, we don't know if there's a premature distribution, because in order to know if there's a premature distribution, we need to know if how old people are. That we know, and whether or not they're still working for the city while collecting a pension. That we don't.
What was that age cutoff?
59 and a half. It could be 55. I got to hit the books on it.
Through the chair, I have a question. So now this only went into effect when?
It's been in effect for a long time, but the IRS made their position clear the last 2 or 3 years. It wasn't clear before that. They issued some regulations and some private letter rulings that clarified what they were doing. So what's been going on back to 1998? There's nobody at fault for that, except the IRS that wasn't very clear on that. Now they're clear. Now we know what we need to do. So when I learned that Marcia Alexander was considering coming back to work part-time, and the city was considering to offer that, that's when I learned that this was going on. I didn't know about it, and your auditor wouldn't pick it up, but now we know. So now we'll fix it. So anyway, I'm glad the city's going to work with us on that, and we'll get you the answers. Finally, the August 25th meeting that you next have, you'll see Pedro here. I am going to be on medical leave, getting my heart valve repaired, and I should be back by your December 8th meeting. It's about a 3-month recovery. Surgery's on July 30th. So Pedro will, of course, be fully able, you've seen him before, to take care of anything that you need while I'm gone. So that's our report.
Were you going to the agenda says response to auditor's adverse opinion on Salem Control. Were you gonna address anything?
I believe Steve Gordon has adequately reported that.
Okay.
I've also reported to you they're willing, and we have the Chief Operating Officer of Salem here, and they've already agreed to pay the extra $500 that Steve said he incurred. Marty will just have to send, and Ronaldo just have to send on the bill. We did it. So, they gave us what you assigned me to ask them for it. They agreed to pay it. So,
Very good.
so far so good.
And they are the next item on the agenda. Oh, sure.
Okay.
That's all?
Well, now what do they do?
Well, back then that was enough.
I recall this happening a year ago, whatever, and we were told only withhold 10 shares. Only hold, I'm sorry, not withhold, hold, back then. So that's what we did.
That's what we got. 10.
Sell it, exactly. Yeah, I do. I remember that. Yeah.
Was that the only manager that holds any of the shares?
Yes.
So
We need to use a mic. I just got a call from a resident.
Oh. Okay. We are.
So we
Can you hear us now, Larry?
Make sure that's communicated.
Well, to Mark. Okay.
Right.
You can send me an email now.
Well, that's what I was going to do. I got his card.
Yeah.
Okay. Trustee Woodruff needs to leave at 5:30. So, but I believe we still have a quorum. Yes, I checked. We do still have quorum. Because we have the two of you. If you were to leave, then.
I'm not leaving. I guess I'm sleeping.
You stay here.
Mr. Rinson?
No.
Got the wrong name on the
Unfortunately,
agenda.
I'm substituting for Brad.
Okay.
My name is Mark Ryan. Last name is spelled R-H-E-I-N. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Salem Trust Company. Unfortunately, Brad could not be here today because of very, very serious family emergency that he's working through. Otherwise, he would have been. So let me begin with a couple observations. I'll bring you up to date on what transpired. As I understand it, Brad and Karen Russo have already shared with you what was the precedent or the predecessor to the SSA 16. Bring you up to date on where we are, and then provide some forward-looking statements. So, observation number one. As Mr. Gordon identified, this system is characterized by a lot of checks and balances. When he didn't have confidence in our statements, he went to the investment managers to double check, to confirm. The investment managers use brokers. Brokers use brokers. Brokers settle up with us. There's a lot of factors involved with this business and directly related to transactions that affect your account. So this business is characterized by a tremendous amount of oversight. Here's my promise. My promise is we will not convert anytime soon in order to prove those factors still exist. Second observation. Despite the consequences, the immediate consequences of the release of the SSA 16, where there was dire prognostications about financial peril, ruin because of the SSA 16, it seems to me as if more careful reasoning and judgment was applied, and the consequence from the SSA 16 on your plan, from what was just reported, is nothing. The financial consequence on all of our plans as a result of the SSA 16, nothing. There were some plans, such as yours, that decided that they needed to have some additional testing done. About 10%. 10% of those plans came back with the same conclusion. No impact. So, from a practical standpoint, the adverse opinion has had no impact, with one exception, reputationally, on Salem Trust. So let me bring you up to date on what transpired. Remember, back 2 years ago, we actually had two conversions. The first conversion was for your pensioners, your retirees. we converted over to a new benefit payment process system. 2,604 pension payments were processed by us without exception. That means every single one of your retirees gets their pension payment on time from us. And unlike the previous system, where it was checks, they had to worry about where's the check, call up Marty, I can't find my check, I'm on vacation, what's going to happen to my check that's in the mailbox? No, because of our conversion, which went effortlessly, they now get everything on time. So, 2,604 payments occurred without exception to about your 210 retirees. Rough math. The second conversion, not so good, and that was the trust conversion to a newer system. Now, it's on us. Observation, we converted, we elected to do this. Any successful conversion hinges on various people doing as they've been asked to do. We asked our investment managers to make sure that their brokers were aware of the new delivery instructions because of our conversion. Our conversion, we did this. Many did, some didn't. The some didn't resulted in 3,000 failed trades in the first 2 weeks, cresting at 5,000 failed trades. Failed trade is kind of like going into the branch, asking for a check going up to a teller counter versus going to an ATM, which is automated. Now, during that period, as our operations department was trying to clear the failed trades, you know for a fact that your plan was impacted because you didn't get your June statement until middle part of October, as they were in the process of catching up. You will never receive a favorable opinion on the SSA 16 if you can't provide your independent auditor the source documentation. And the source documentation was not retained. The SSA 16 does not assert that trades were not performed correctly, settlement was not performed correctly, income was not collected correctly, dividends weren't not properly collected. They were, but the SSA 16 says, okay, fine, if you do this, show us the source documentation. If you settle your trades on a daily basis, show us your daily log. And that was not retained. And as a result, that's the basis for the adverse opinion. If you go through the SSA 16 and read it, you'll see that it's all about documentation.
It was not retained or it didn't exist?
Certainly it existed.
That the document, if that's what they're looking for, then you would, it's not like somebody, oops, I tossed it away.
Well, that is what happened, as a matter of fact. You need daily a journal that says, here are your trades that you have to reconcile. That was done. The next moment, the person was in the process of doing something else. So yes, it's exactly what happened. That's why the documentation was not retained. It wasn't because of anybody who was doing something maliciously. It's just in the pure chaos of the moment. So, if it wasn't balanced, then guess what? Your statements would still be out of balance. Your income would still be a mess. It was done. It's just that the core documentation was not retained. That's what it comes down to. So the release of the SSA 16 in February resulted in us putting in place a series of activities, including a task force that meets on a weekly basis now. Every single week, we have met, addressed the key elements of the deficiencies. We have a plan in place, narrative already done, and the kickoff for the next SSA 16 period, which ends 2 weeks from now. It goes from July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2015. They've already asked for additional documentation, and the auditors have already agreed to come sooner than expected, July 6th. It will be on site from July 6th through roughly about August 1st, doing their testing, validating everything that we have in place. Now, it is also true, as I mentioned previously, that the consequence of a crisis can be mitigated if you have the right people, and we didn't. Candidly, that's why we have a new director of operations. Candidly, that's why we have new people working in the operations department, because the previous ones couldn't handle it. So, we've upgraded our staff, we've identified the deficiencies, We've already been on testing on those deficiencies. We know for a fact that from your own auditor, everything's in balance. So what's the next thing? Validation of all those things that we believe are in place and truthful, and that will occur with the next SSA 16 report. We expect to have that report prepared, ready sometime around the end of September, maybe beginning part of October. Put this in perspective just for a second. Most of the time this report is released towards the end of October. So we're already backing it up. And if everything goes well, perfection in place, then it will probably be out sooner than September 30th.
I would agree that your reputation has been damaged as a result of this, and I have concerns that I think any board would have. I mean, you're entrusted with holding billions and billions of clients' money, so over 70 million of our own, 79, almost $80 million. Now, Mr. Sugarman says that your company holds $5 million in liability insurance.
No, he said there's $5 million in insurance and equated that to assets. There's no direct correlation between assets and risk and insurance. It all has everything to do with the activities that are being performed to support those assets. For example, if it is directly related to assets, then I guess we could shrink our business by 50% and yet retain all the activity for all the brokers and all the investment managers who have the highest level of trading activity. Does our exposure go down because we have more trades performed over a lower amount of assets? No. It doesn't change. In fact, it goes up.
My concern is how can you assure us that, I mean, you stated that you didn't have the proper experienced personnel and that you've replaced them and you've made them better. What if something were to happen again this year where you have poor personnel, something happens, assets are lost? What is...
Let's just also acknowledge for a second that no assets were lost.
I understand, but
None.
that doesn't mean that it can't happen. I don't know what the board's position, what we would do. Is that something that would be covered by some sort of liability insurance? Bob, I'm not sure.
If they were negligent, and if assets disappeared, that's what you have insurance for. Once the insurance is exhausted, then you go into the financial statement of the company, and you see if they have sufficient assets to satisfy a judgment against you. You don't want to have to do that, which is why we require all of our vendors to have insurance.
But the insurance is nowhere near the amount of assets that we're concerned about.
True.
No, nor is it for any custodian.
I understand.
Absolutely.
Custodians that hold $3 billion of assets do not have $3 billion of insurance, just as you don't have $70 million of insurance for your $70 million of assets.
I think my concern is, and I'm kind of hearing it from Lori also, I think, I don't want to speak for her though, that we're already on notice that there's been a problem. If we were not to take action on that, and a second problem occurred, then the onus would be on us to a degree because we were already warned that there was a problem. And we didn't take any corrective action on our part. And therefore, we would be...
I'm not sure that corrective action is required. What is required is for you to do due diligence investigation as to what happened. So here's what I know that you've done so far, because I've seen it with my own eyes. And that is that you've had the president of the company, now you're the COO, right? The COO and the person we most commonly did business with, that was what?
Karen Russo.
Karen, here in front of you answering questions. You've had your auditor confirm that the financial statements that you got from them are correct. And you've heard from them the corrective action that they took to respond to the audit, the adverse audit opinion. The question is that satisfactory in your mind? To me, you've made a legally adequate investigation by everything you had done. But legal is just the bare minimum. Just if something's legal doesn't mean you should do it. The question is, what we want our clients to do is to feel comfortable with the people we're dealing with. So me assuring you that you've done reasonable due diligence on this and sufficient due diligence doesn't make you feel, may or may not make you feel comfortable. So that's really the question. Because I don't know what corrective action you could take, Larry, other than to ask, because you can't go in and tell them how to run their business. That's what their auditors did, and that's what their new COO did. You can't decide whether they lost any of your money, but your auditor says they didn't. So, okay, and he, unlike other auditors, took extra steps to satisfy himself of that. So for me, I think you've done enough legally. You need to answer whether you're comfortable.
Laurie, I just interject something? Just for operational, what we also do with me and Ronaldo, each month, all the managers reconcile their assets to Salem Trust individually, separate from what Salem does. And they do have differences because 99% of the time it's a trade-dated item versus settlement. And it's noted there on the reports. So we get a report every month reconciling. I don't know if Steve knew that, but that's what they do. They've been doing since inception. That's one of the reports that we require every single month, that the managers balance the Salem Trust. And they have to, because that's, so assets wouldn't, if they get lost, it'll be on the manager side. And they would notify, there'll be a break, there'll be a big difference. So that's not, I mean, knock wood, that should never happen.
And have you and Ronaldo had any issues at all with working with Salem Trust and
No.
with their statements and?
Never.
No.
Any issues we've had, which is normal operation questions, have always been responded to by Karen or Wanda or whoever's there. You know, I've never had any problems. They're very receptive to any request that
How
we
long
make.
have we been doing business with Salem Trust?
2002.
It's a long time.
Yeah, and let's also put another stakeholder in this whole discussion. Your retirees. Any impact on them? Nope. Zero.
Okay.
So, in conclusion, from my standpoint, thank you for your relationship that you've shared with us through the years. Thank you for bearing with us over some very difficult conditions. Those conditions now go back 2 years. We are certainly highly motivated to make sure that this next SSA 16 is presented to our clients with an opinion that is much superior to that which happened previously. Let's just acknowledge for a second, we're not working through 3,000 failed trades any longer. But we understand that there has been an emotional or a reputational stain associated with this that needs to be cleansed. And that's true for not only the company, but for Brad, who works there, Karen, who works there, and for me as well.
How many clients have you lost over this?
Difficult to say. The reason is there isn't any one specific client who has left because of the SSA 16. But let me put this in perspective. Since 2004 through the first quarter of 2015, 15 clients. Now, how many of those have left because of an action that they initiated on their own? About 9. Where's the difference? We review our clients to make a determination on their profitability. 6 of those clients left because when we were looking at the revenue that we collect from them, it was insufficient, inadequate to cover our costs. So we requested a fee increase, and they elected to move to a cheaper alternative. So 9. The other companion question is how many pieces of business, how many new relationships have you booked? 4. Substantially less than prior years, but still business coming in. How is it that you got 4? Because again, our business model doesn't hinge exclusively on plans just like yours. We have other custody services that are provided to a broad range of other types of entities. Nonprofits, for-profits, insurance companies, state accounts, the whole bit. So they were largely not impacted by the SSA 16. Your plan was, but let me stay focused on what's really important, and that's you. In reinstilling the confidence that you have in us to deliver across a broad spectrum of all the services that we provide, and we feel very confident that you'll have proof of that within the next couple months.
And when did you say we'll next hear from your external auditors?
Well, the SSA 16 auditors, we had the kickoff meeting last week, so we're already hearing from them. We would expect to
hear from them?
well, whenever the
You have something, a copy you can give us.
whenever the plan is finalized, and we're expecting that plan to be finalized somewhere around the end of September, early part of October. Now, if all goes well, perfection comes in, then maybe even sooner than September 30th. But I want to make sure you heard me. September 30th is really a target date.
So how's that new software working out for you?
Oh, gosh. I mean,
Well, only because we're going through
Plus, he's going to tell you it's
a software
here's-
migration ourselves.
Here's
So,
one
you know,
thing.
I'm dreading, we might have the same experience that you.
My advice is if you can avoid conversions, absolutely do that. Work with the devil you know. I would, here's what we learned. Here's what we learned, and I'll share this with you, right? We learned that a conversion should never be based on assumptions of competence of your stakeholders. We assumed for a second that the investment managers who we were dealing with were competent, capable enough individuals to make sure that the new delivery instructions were sent to their brokers, the people they use. We were seriously mistaken in that. There's more than 1,000 brokers out there. We have no idea which ones are used or not used. But that was the assumption that premised our conversion that caught us after the fact, as well as an assumption of capabilities with some of our employees, which woefully was not well-founded. But my advice, don't do it.
Oh, you got to move ahead,
I know.
We got software that's over 20 years old. So.
Oh, then I think you're compelled to.
Yes. I would say that we will be closely watching out for the next SSA 16.
You and others, let me assure you of that, and you and others have made it very clear on us what must be done.
Mm-hmm. Any comments from the rest?
Well, I don't want to, I think we're all thinking, but I don't want to put it out as a threat. If that next audit comes out with any problems, bon voyage.
Basically, it's kind of like this. I own a house that has a tree on it, right? We have squirrels in the tree. There's always that remote chance that a squirrel could fall down on a pedestrian and scratch the pedestrian, and I could get sued.
You better not fall twice.
That squirrel would fall. Right. Yep.
Alrighty.
Thank you. For the record, too, my telephone number, any questions about this, 813-299.
Marty, take it down.
Okay, you got it. Call me directly if there's anything else that may crop up. Needless to say, we'll be at your next meeting as well.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is in August, though. There's
Why is it so soon?
because this one's late. This should have been last year, Voice.
We're late. We're running late.
Exhausted. I got a meeting and does anyone care?
Okay,
about
we're
me?
gonna.
Does anyone care about me?
Okay, here's Bob.
I need to take on a hiatus.
Okay, Bob's back.
We need to amend, please. I just got an email from Mark Bogan. Oh, did you take any action on Salem?
No, we
No,
didn't.
not yet.
Okay. We need to amend the motion that
on McGraw Hill to substitute 10 shares for 100 shares.
Yes. As
Yeah,
the
we
one
had
who
said
made the
contingent on
motion,
100, it's contingent on 10.
I'm amending my motion. If we'll check a new second. This-
Okay, you're amending the motion?
I made the motion, I think, for 100. I'm changing it to 10. If the person who seconded would accept that.
It was probably, was it Barbara that
Barbara.
seconded it?
Okay, she said sure, whatever, which is affirmative to me.
We're amending the motion that we get from the 100 shares to the 10 shares. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Yo.
Okay. Charlie, would you let them know to keep holding the 10, please? Okay.
In the meantime, he sold 2 shares.
Okay, we got to move along. My drop admin rules, I got things on it that we may have to table it again. Is that a problem? Okay, so maybe the things that I have on it, I can just run by Bob by email to see what he thinks, and we could maybe incorporate some of them, or
Sure, on which, on the
questions?
rules, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna table the drop
Let's try to
admin
wrap
rules.
things up.
Or if you want, I can come over here one day and we can all meet.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
You know, you and me and Ray and Ronaldo and Marty, and we can all meet and
Did you have anything that you wanted to comment on the drop admin?
No, I
rules?
did not.
Okay, you? No. Okay, so it's only me, so, okay, good, we can do that. You know me, I read all these things and.
Yeah, but I always like to be
Well,
enlightened by your comments.
Then
so
you're
I'm gonna
you're
miss it.
invited to the meeting.
No, she can come to meetings as long as you post it.
We could do a strikeout version, so you see what I,
Yeah, I'd like
what
to.
we,
I
what
would.
I
mean, it
added or
does help
changed.
me see
Look,
how things through the
If you don't object, Barbara, we'll set the meeting at the time that Laurie can go. And then if you want to come, just give us a couple days' notice so we can notice the meeting. If not, we'll send you the results.
Lori, can you put down like what those
But
objections are and send it to us?
You're not noticing a full board meeting, are you?
No. Pardon?
You're not noticing a full board
No,
meeting.
it would be a committee meeting.
Committee
There'd
meeting,
be two
fine, that's
people
fine.
there. If anybody wants to come, you know.
Fine, fine. As
Otherwise,
long as,
just let
I
you
just want
know
to make
how
sure
it
it's not a
turned
full
out,
board
'cause
meeting.
You'll have to pass it anyway in August.
All right. Okay. The assistant pension administrator contract, I believe at the last meeting, I was asked to work with the chairman of the police and fire board and meet with Ronaldo to go over his terms of employment, his salary, and what was the percentage we agreed to? 3%?
3%, yes.
So this was, we proposed giving him a $3,000 a year salary increase.
No, it's
Was it?
1,500.
Oh, well, it
1,500
was
per
3,000
board.
altogether, but it's
Total.
1,500 for each board. And that he would receive an additional 3% increase on his anniversary date, which is January 6th, for the next 3 years, and that we would review it again in January of 2018.
I make a motion to accept, the contract for our employee Ronaldo Gale as stated.
Okay?
Second.
And that's retroactive to the first payroll date of January 2006. 15.
Okay.
Right?
Yes,
And all in favor? I'm in favor.
You.
thank you.
I'm gonna come before us to get some.
An open discussion. We have nobody. Anyone have anything else they want to raise?
I just want to ask a question when our October meeting is, since the meeting dates get switched around so much, my calendar,
It's in December.
December?
No,
Yeah.
October
No, I
date.
got it down here.
Now it's not a problem.
We don't have an October meeting.
December 8th.
December 8th.
August 25, Pedro will be here, December 8th.
Oh, the next one's at 12.
Okay.
All right, a motion for the approval of the minutes.
December 8th.
Anyone want to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
So move.
All in favor? Aye. Approval of the invoices. Let's look at them.
The meeting's 3 p.m. in December.
Motion to approve the, invoices. Nico.
Yeah.
And I believe
Oh, yeah.
one of the things that we did that was a little unusual, just so you know, but I didn't think it would be a problem, was to go ahead and pay Greystone's consulting fees a little earlier, since this meeting we were running late, so that we could pay him kind of on time. So we're just ratifying that decision I made.
Thank you.
And it's a flat fee, so that's why I didn't see a problem with it.
Okay,
Thank
so Larry seconded it.
Okay,
Yes, I did.
so all in favor for approving the invoices? Aye. And so, okay, so next meeting is August 25th, 2015.
So
And a motion
moved.
to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, August 25th at what, that's a Thursday? Tuesday. So now we're on Tuesdays? Okay, but that doesn't work if I have a council meeting and I could end it. I won't have one, I don't have a budget meeting, nothing? Well, you gotta check, cause I,
We're in the budget
long day for me.
season. All right, we'll have to get with the city
So
manager's
far
office
it's
or something.
24